Members of council, if I can please have you take your seats. This meeting is now resumed. What? Yes. Thank you very much. Before we start, I'd like to welcome the students, grade 5 students from Northleigh Public School and Miss Robson's class, and the local counselor is Councillor Burnside. Welcome. Okay, give it to her. This meeting is now resumed. Before the recess, Council was considering the Mayor's first key item, CD 25.5. Before we return to that item, I would take the release of member holds. And I also have a number of urgent motions to be added to agenda if we have 30 members. Councillor Karygiannis.
Yes, Madam Chair. I was holding two items. One on page 4, EX 30.4, implementation of municipal accommodation tax. Staff has answered my question, so I'm letting that go. Page 7, GM 24.4.
Okay, just one sec. So on one at a time. So on page 4, you're releasing EX 30.4. Okay, on the hotel tax?
Yes, Madam Chair.
Okay. Okay, recorded vote. Okay, so we'll continue to hold it. Cancel the vote. Okay, Councillor Karygiannis, what's your next one? Okay, please, we need to pay attention because we have releases and I want members to know what we're releasing. Okay, Councillor, what page? No, what page? What page? Page 7. Page 7?
Keep on holding it.
Okay. He wanted to release GM 24.4 and it's going to continue to be held. Councillor Al-Jamari.
Thank you. Page 6, bottom of the page. Metrolinx to consider designating portion of Finch West LRT maintenance and storage facility site for community use. There were two small errors in the motion that was moved to committee. There's the correction.
Okay, so you would like to continue holding it? Okay, so Councillor Al-Jamari, it would still be in your name, okay? Councillor Mihevc?
Yes, thank you. On the top of page 9, PW 26.5 Metrolinx Eglinton Crosstown LRT, I could dispose of that if we could go public, if I could ask staff one question to clarify something on the public record, and then it will go away.
No.
PW 26.5.
No, actually, Councillor Mihevc, I'm hearing no, so
okay.
We'll continue to hold it. Councillor DeBaeremaeker.
Madam Speaker, for quick releases on page 10, and there's one on page 11. These are the two tree planting items. Clerks have my motion. So on page 10, North York 27.31, application to remove a city tree on 4 Clovelly Avenue. I'll just move the staff recommendation, which is on the screen.
Who's the councillor?
Yep.
Recorded.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Matlow. Members, we previously cancelled the vote, so your buttons may be lit up. Madam Speaker. Councillor Layton, please.
The amendment carries 26 to 9.
That was the item, right? Yeah. Councillor DeBaeremaeker on page 11.
Yes, Madam Chair, same thing. I'll just move the staff recommendations on NY 27.32.
It says without recommendation.
Okay. Recorded vote on that one?
Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor Layton, Councillor Wong-Tam, and Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Perruzza, your vote, please. Councillor Perruzza, may we have your vote, please?
The motion carries 27 to 8.
Councillor Troisi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I need to reopen on page 12, TE 29.54, and move the new staff amendment.
Well, actually, it's being held down.
Is it held down? No. It was already released.
2954?
Yes.
Oh, it was amended.
Yeah,
Oh,
move the
okay. So to reopen then, okay. So, all in favor to reopen? Carried. Okay, the new amendment? All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Al-Jamari?
Yes, page 6, bottom of the page, Metrolinx to consider designating portion of Finch West LRT. I have a quick amendment.
But didn't some members of council say they had an issue?
Because the Councillor Anthony Perruzza wasn't in the room, he's in the room now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. That was the reason.
All right, so on page 6, CD 25.6, Councillor Al-Jamari is moving the amendment. All in favor? Carried. Item is amended. All in favor? Carried. Councillor Burnside?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. This is a situation that's going to the T-Lab. The Preservation Board has suggested that we designate this, so it is urgent.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Matlow?
Madam Speaker, the builder is seeking to get a demolition permit. We are proactively taking action to preserve this historic landmark in the Davisville Village.
All in favor? Carried. Councillor Bailao?
Yes, Madam Speaker. I have motions to be introduced, 3 motions. most of them related to AGCO matters, I believe. One. Oh, there we go.
On the screen.
Yep. So this is to send our positioning to the AGCO with regards to a liquor license at 1006 Bloor Street West.
Okay, on favor, carried.
This is Paradise Theater.
If I could only report it.
And this is another AGCO matter with relations to 1358 Dundas Street West.
On favor, carried.
And the third one is at the request of staff for a transportation service capital budget adjustment. This has to do with a settlement that we had to reach on a matter related to expropriation.
On favor, carried. Councillor Fragadakis. There's another.
Yes, Madam Speaker. I have I believe it's my motion to get the temporary delegation. Well, after this meeting, we won't be meeting until the end of March.
Okay. On favor, carried. Councillor Kristyn, you have 3.
Thank you, Speaker. If the first one can be put on the screen. This is urgent as the deadline for comment, it's an AGCO matter, was January 7th.
On favor, carried.
We just added an AGCO liquor license matter. I have a second, if it can be put up.
We just funded Rail Deck Park.
Yeah. Again, this is another liquor license matter. It is urgent because the deadline for comment to the AGCO was December 24th.
On favor, carried.
I have one more. The third can be put on the screen. This is the third. This was a technical amendment from staff. It is urgent in order for work to continue on the YMCA portion of the site.
On favor, carried.
Thank you.
Councillor Thompson.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm just waiting for it to come on the screen. I think this is the Yorkdale matter. Is that the one? Yes, Speaker. Seeking a specific site exemption from Chapter 510 of the holiday shopping for Yorkdale Shopping Centre on Family Day.
Okay. This is just for a special exemption. So do you want a recorded vote to introduce it? We're just introducing it.
Sure, why not?
Okay, recorded vote. Family Day. This is a special exemption.
Councillor Holland, please.
Councillor Matlow, please.
The motion to introduce does not carry. The vote is 15 to 23.
Okay. Are there any more? That's it? Okay, let's put the speakers list. Councillor Fletcher, you ready? Okay.
I am ready, Speaker. And I have a motion there, right there. And that's just further to the conversations that we were having at Community Development Recreation and that we've been having for a number of years, including the report that came in 2014 when we are losing faith sites to large developments. And just to remind Council that Cornerstone Shelter in Councillor Mihevc's ward, unbeknownst to anyone, they closed it, sold the church, and we spent a long time moving it to Councillor Cole's ward. A lot of carry-on, a lot of angst, a lot of work with that, when that perhaps could have been nipped in the bud if we'd looked at that church site. And the Red Door, which you're all very well aware of, where we had a chance for that site, acre site, and didn't do that. Instead, it went to a large developer. For many reasons we know, the shelter's been built into the development at much greater cost than if we had secured the site. So this is just following on some of our policy. I think out of this and sitting in CDR, hearing about the number of new shelters and new shelter beds that we require, and with our new shelter standards of 60 to 80 beds per shelter, we have to be very proactive to secure these sites. And I know it is up to the city, but it's also up, I believe, to the community. And there's members of the community out there. There's 18 out of the cold programs. And I just want to take a moment during this conversation that we're having today, Speaker, through you, to thank every single one of the volunteers that work in their out of the cold program to set it up, to make a comfortable bed, to make food, to look after people that need that safe, secure place during the cold winters. And I'm not sure we actually thank them enough. They also know their communities very well. They can be our ambassadors. They should be our ambassadors to finding new shelter beds, new shelter sites. We need to call on them and say, please, you are so good at your one site. Can you help us think about what else we can do in order to add 1,000 beds, 1,500 beds, whatever that is. I know we're working at the institutional level, but I always think we have to work with our friends in the community who know sites, who have ideas, who want to help. Because if there was anything that came through in this very difficult Christmas period, it's that Torontonians felt, my goodness, we need to step up. We need to step up and look after these folks who are on the street in the coldest days of the year. And having said that, I want to segue to the issue of supportive housing. And the Mayor, Councillor McMahon, and myself were at the New Hope Leslieville, which is its name. Part of the new looking at shelters, it's not a shelter, it's a New Hope site. It's a bridge to other things in your life. There is a housing worker there. There is a health worker there. That's what we went to announce. And there's also counseling there. There's a lot that goes on that site that doesn't necessarily go on in other locations, other hospice, other shelters of this nature. That's our new model. And the next step from that is to bridge these folks who live there into some kind of supportive housing. They could not go from that site into a direct apartment. I think that would be very hard. So our supportive housing requirements are very, very great for everybody who's leaving a shelter, who needs that environment of total support. So I do think there's a continuum, and I want to thank Councillor Bailao for her remarks, because she placed this on the longer continuum. Why are we opening shelters? Because people are losing their homes, they can't pay the rent. There's many, many, many different reasons, but we need to put housing on that continuum as well. And to only speak about shelters, we shouldn't do that. We have a bigger picture, and I really commend her for bringing that forward to us. So these are, we are always in a learning situation here, and this was a very difficult winter. I know our staff were working very hard. We don't have all the tools that we need in order to be successful, and I look forward to all of the next steps that we can put into effect in order to be the caring and open city that I know we are.
Thank you. We do have a question for you, clarification of the motion. Councillor Holliday.
Thank you, Speaker. And if I could ask the clerks to put it up just so I've got it in front of me. Thank you. Through you to the member, if I understand, can I paraphrase that this says to send the deputy city manager to go and acquire properties such as churches and other faith-based places? Just go buy churches.
Well, I
Is that
think
what it says?
it is closed, or those churches that are for sale, in particular, ones that already have programs. And if I could just spend a second on the Red Door, which was a large site that was for sale. We missed that at $4 million, and now putting a small shelter inside a large condo is double or more in order to
we
do
have a
that.
real
So
estate
penny
group.
wise and pound foolish.
So we have a real estate group that's tasked with acquiring lands.
I guess the
to
deputy
meet
city
our
manager
programs.
would work with that group.
We would sort of tamper with the processes there, whatever they are, to get the best deal on the best property for the right fit. And we're going to sort of go to a particular class of property or a particular thing. Why would we want to do that? Why would we want to kind of tamper and squeeze and change the outcome? Why wouldn't we just let the real estate people find what we need?
Because, Councillor, this should be on their radar. I know it is possibly on their radar. I think Council can underscore what is already on the radar. And we do have a report from 2014 which very clearly talks about city services and important social services out of faith-based institutions, many of which are now finding themselves in crisis. And perhaps we don't even know about that. So this is just going down a different road for meeting those types of needs that we're having this conversation about
So we'll use a
today.
different process to deal with shelters. I get it. Okay, thank you.
I'm, in a comment back, staff are quite happy to work with this process, to have that introduced in that way, to say we really have to look at these types of situations. And I don't want to see another cornerstone. I don't want to see another Red Door. I don't want to see another missed opportunity, because once you miss it, relocating it is very, very, very difficult. And we have a big job in front of us, Councillor, in order to satisfy at least 1,000 shelter beds and nowhere to put them. So that's why I moved this motion.
Thank you. Oh. Councillor Kelly, you have a question?
Yes.
Clarification.
Thank you. This is somewhat akin to the
Is this a question?
the information that's provided to us under
Sorry.
other information.
I thought you were speaking, Councillor. I'm sorry.
But I want to make sure that I understand the intent of your amendment. What you're saying is go out, talk to the various faith groups, see what properties are or may become available. Once identified, those properties will then be processed according to I guess, according to the rules and regulations that will shape the new Toronto Realty Agency. Is that correct?
None of this is working outside of the Toronto Real Estate Agency.
All right.
This is working in tandem with the Real Estate Agency, not going outside of their jurisdiction. I guess they would execute a number of those things, or that would come into their portfolio. But thank you for that question, because it really has to do with what services currently exist in churches. A number of them are what we'll call closed churches. I'll give you another example at Riverdale United, which was closed and which Wood Green bought and now is put in housing for 36 seniors, rent geared to income. So it's making sure we don't miss these opportunities for faith-based institutions that have really played an important role in the community as service providers.
So there's nothing about this that ignores or sets aside the procedure of the City of Toronto with respect to purchasing properties?
Well, no, it would give the authority. Thank you. No, the staff from, I think the TRA staff wrote that. Our staff wrote this, and Ms. Scioli was involved in that. So they're very aware of the TRA.
I'm lobbing the ball at you, Councillor.
Thank you, and I appreciate the lob, and I'm sending it back and saying everything is in order, but thank you for checking.
Thank you. Well, Councillor Davis, you didn't have your name up there before. Okay, Councillor Fletcher.
Nope.
Councillor Davis, question.
Go ahead.
Do you have a question?
I was going to ask if in fact we are looking at, I just wanted to reinforce, your motion also says we're looking at the possibility of those spaces for shelters and other potential services. Is that right?
My motion, I'm clear that if we were looking to acquire something, that building a one-story shelter or only having a shelter, there may be other uses that could be in that site. But this is very much tailored through this conversation we're having today and the urgency that I feel being on CDR with the need to relocate all of George Street and to open a number of new shelters. So it's quite aggressive in the shelters, but there would probably be other services that could co-locate.
Right. That's why I just wanted to make it understand the intent is to look at potentially other uses as well.
Yes, but the main intent is to ensure that we have housing, that we have shelter beds, that we have up to our new standard, that we have locations that we're seeking out and taking quick action on those counts.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're, Councillor Perks.
Thank you, Speaker, and good afternoon. I have a motion. I move that in order to address the shelter crisis that is a result of the lack of affordable housing across the City, City Council requests the Chief Planner and Executive Director, City Planning, to report to the Planning and Growth Management Committee at its April 5, 2018 meeting on proposed amendments to the City zoning bylaw to make rooming houses a permitted use citywide. Councillor Bailao, I think, gave what is the most important speech we've had on this item. She pointed out very simply and very straightforwardly that among the key reasons that people wind up in our shelter system is that there aren't any housing options available to them. There are many different populations who wind up homeless in the City of Toronto, but a key population, or two key populations that are there, are people who simply cannot afford to find anywhere in the City of Toronto that they can rent. And there's another population, which I will talk about more in a moment, for whom it is challenging to maintain an apartment. The rooming house is the solution to each of those problems. The rents charged in rooming houses are lower than are charged for full apartments. I know this very well because I have something approaching 100 rooming houses in Parkdale, but I want to tell you we are losing them. They're being purchased and converted to single-family dwellings, or in some cases to 20 units become 4 and they're sold off as luxury apartments. We talk about affordability many times, affordable housing in this council. We talk about affordable housing for young families. We talk about affordable housing for people who are leaving the family home. But sometimes in trying to provide housing for those populations, the people who can least afford to live in the City of Toronto are moved out. I have experience of us providing rent supplements to people who are moving into new apartments that used to be rooming houses. We're actually spending city money to help displace the people who can least afford to be displaced. Now, I know we have had many conversations with the public and with each other about the issue of rooming houses, and I know that we thought that there was a plan for dealing with them this term. I will remind you that some time ago, this City Council directed staff to report to the Executive Committee in 2017 with some kind of a proposal to make rooming houses, which are only permitted in a very small part of the city, citywide. That report never came. It never came. And that is so typical of the way that we address that issue in this city. I remember when we were creating the zoning bylaw, the harmonized zoning bylaw for the City of Toronto in the late 2 terms ago and then the beginning of this term, city staff, based on advice from councillors, took the issue of rooming houses out from the harmonized zoning bylaw and said, we will deal with everything in the zoning bylaw. We'll deal with setbacks, we'll deal with commercial uses, we'll deal with heights, we'll deal with all of those issues in the zoning bylaws from the predecessor municipalities, and we'll stitch them together into a single bylaw, except rooming houses. It's the only thing that we as a council were unprepared to deal with. And there's a relationship between that decision then and this crisis now. For a large part of the population who are living on the street, the mayor has pointed out that there's a relationship between housing and mental health. Some people think that it's causal. If you have a mental health problem, that's why you wind up on the street. But there's a secondary thing that happens, which is if you wind up on the street, the stress, the unimaginable stress of being homeless starts to make it difficult for you to imagine ever being housed again, and starts to reduce your resiliency and capacity to deal with the challenges of meeting rent every month and managing a household. Many jurisdictions, Montreal for example, recognize that rooming house, because it has shared washrooms or shared kitchens, are a form of congregate living where people with similar experiences can support each other. It's a form of natural supportive housing. So members, I encourage you, please, if you care about the issue of homelessness, if you care about the crisis we're having in our shelter system, support this motion today.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam to speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. And if I can ask the clerk to put the motion onto the screen, please. Essentially, the motion is asking the staff to review the report that is placed on every single desk right now, an evaluation of Toronto's warming centre and winter response to homelessness. This was authored by the Health Providers Against Poverty, and I would ask that the General Manager report back to CDR in their February 28th meeting, that the date is missing from that, as a report back on the feasibility of implementing some of their recommendations. So if I can ask the clerks to make sure that there's a report back on the date of this motion, which is February 28th, the next meeting of CDR. I would appreciate that. So, Madam Speaker, this has been a very difficult 2 months, at least 3 months now, for myself personally, and it's largely been difficult because we have 25% of the shelters of the entire City of Toronto shelter inventory in Ward 27. If I take a look at my neighbor in Ward 28, between Ward 28 and Ward 27, we have 32% of the shelters in our vicinity. It's been very challenging because we have seen these issues as they emerge in terms of the fraying and the cracking in the shelter system for some time. It's also been largely frustrating, Madam Speaker, because the issues that have been raised by the community advocates and the frontline workers and everybody who's actually providing some supports to those individuals in the shelters have been raising the concerns that the system is overburdened, it is overcrowded. The report before you is an independent report, and interestingly enough, the item before us, as we're discussing it, was simply a presentation that was supposed to be delivered at CDR. And this was staff's response to what they felt was their response during the winter respite crisis. And interestingly enough, the recommendations before you are the recommendations placed at CDR from members of CDR. And so why I highlight all of this is because I think that it's important to note that, you know, these recommendations that are before you from CDR and the recommendations that are before you from this independent report is really the observations of people who are, number one, taking into consideration the lived experiences of those who appear before the committee, telling us what they need in order for them to be successful, to provide supports and care for people who are vulnerable and street involved. And unfortunately, what I think I have been seeing is that it hasn't always been driven from staff side. And this is not to say that staff are not doing a good job. I want to be really clear is that they do what we tell them to do, and we empower them to do it by making sure there's allocations in the funding so that they can do a good job. What we have been doing is not giving them the direction to do the work that they need to do to actually fix the system. And so they're doing the very best that they can, given the fact that we haven't given them as much resources as we need to. So this is why the advocates keep coming back to City Hall time and time again to try to raise the alarm bell. And I think they've been very patient, to be quite honest. They've been very respectful, just trying to say, please, can you give us a hand? We can't do this by ourselves. So who are the authors of this report? Nurses, nurse practitioners, physicians, psychiatrists, social workers. And what did they do to give you the result of this report today? Well, they went out on their own during the month of December and January, and they assessed all the warming facilities, the winter respites that we had. And this is before the Better Living Center was open, before Regent Park, before the Armory, and before Metro Hall. And what they've concluded, based on their observations and interviews, was that there was dramatic overcrowding, and that 70% of these individuals that they spoke to had witnessed some type of violence, that 80% of these individuals had experienced some type of refusal when asking for service. And so there are lists of recommendations that they've put into this report that I think are very, very straightforward. But they're not just asking the City of Toronto to take action, they're also saying the province and the federal government have to do their part. So let the staff take the findings, evaluate what they see, and then come back to us at CDR in February with some implementation plans. They've also described this situation that we're in as an undeclared emergency. And I know that there's reluctance in this chamber and among staff to call it a crisis or an emergency. But let's be really clear. The Better Living Center was not on the table in December when we voted at City Council. Neither was the Armory, and neither were the 1,000 beds. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mihevc.
Thank you. Can I speak from here?
Yes. Okay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I thought that I would just add, there's been a lot of good comments made from a variety of folks. I thought I would add just some contextualization to this. We've had, of course, a very interesting and conflictual month. And I think what we're really debating right now is a piece of what the diagram is before us now. It is worth reflecting, and one's analysis on the problem really instructs one on the solutions as to how to get out of the problem. I think it's important for us to remember that the reason why we are in this crisis, emergency, dire situation is really because of 20 years ago, the federal government made a decision that they were going to get out of the social housing business. It's because Toronto has become a very, very expensive city with its rents. I think I read a report recently that just in the last year, rents have gone up 11%. When things like that happen, people are pushed in a downward direction. The people who have very good housing get pushed to good housing, push other people to fair housing, other people to poor housing. Eventually, somebody gets pushed to the street. For us, as a city, today's debate really is part of a much larger debate on how we rebuild the housing fabric that allows housing opportunities for everyone. Today, our focus is on these two steps in the process. I think Councillor Bailau's excellent comments really challenge us to think of the other steps in the process as well. And I don't think we should forget that even as we vote for these motions here. Our job today is to, yes, vote for these motions, but it's also to remember that it is one step in a process that is going to engage not just us for this term of council, but for the next term of council. we will need to, as a council, from all sides, come together the way we had around public transit, and shake the provincial and federal governments to their core, asking not for millions of dollars, not for tens of millions of dollars, not even for hundreds of millions of dollars, but for billions of dollars to basically push the direction that we need to be going into up the steps rather than down the steps. That, I think, is the challenge for anyone seeking election or re-election to the next term of this council or for any other order of government. The housing issue has become, for Torontonians, the key core issue that will determine our health and vitality as a city. So today is great, but it only really begins the work that we need to all commit ourselves to. That's all I have to say, Madam Speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor DeBaeremaeker to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a motion. The motion reads that City Council direct the General Manager, Shelter Support and Housing Administration to investigate the feasibility of expanding the Respite Centre at 705 Progress Avenue from 49 beds to 100 beds, including ensuring social service and mental health supports are available at the site. And Madam Speaker, I think all of us have I'll call it common cause. None of us wants to see any of our own family members or our friends or our loved ones or our neighbors to have to use these services. We have to have a very big toolbox of tools to help people better their lives and to give them the services and support that they need and they deserve. I happen to be the councillor for Scarborough Centre. A year ago, when these issues were coming forward, I had discussions with staff saying I will be a willing host in terms of helping locate a respite centre in Scarborough. They are difficult to locate. There are very many complications. If you put them next to a daycare centre or to a school or to residential homes, you'll get pushback. Fortunately for me and for the city, we happen to own a piece of property in my ward that was, I think, an ideal place. In fact, my concern when I talked to staff was, this is so far away, I don't even think the homeless will want to come here because it's far away. It's a sleepy, suburban, industrial area. And to my, I'll say, pleasant surprise, the people who have come out to our shelter in Scarborough like it. And one of the reasons they like it is because many of them are from Scarborough. When the mayor and I've been there in other times, when the mayor and I walked through that site and chatted with people, and again, without poking or prodding people, but just as human being to human being, the mayor sat down and was breaking bread with people and chatting with people, and we would just say in conversation, "Oh, and where are you from?" And a strong majority of them, not every single one, but a large number of them said, "I'm from Scarborough and I want to stay in Scarborough and I don't want to go downtown." There were some people who were from downtown who said, "Since I've come to this Scarborough shelter, I really like it here because it's quiet." So perhaps me as a councillor, I cannot put myself in the shoes of some of the clients and some of the people who use this respite centre, but they actually liked the fact that it was a little further away, a little away from the action, maybe a little away from temptation, away from all sorts of things that they don't want to have in their lives. It's turned out to be a very good respite centre. We've had a couple of issues, challenges, because we set it up very quickly in the middle of a whole bunch of businesses that are now interacting with dozens of men and individuals who let's just say, are not going into the businesses to purchase things and to spend money. But those issues, the staff have been fabulous. We're working them out. So I, as one councillor, want to say I welcome more centres like this, more affordable housing projects in my house. I think Councillor Bilow can tell you, every time I come to her committee, I just say more, 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 more. So I think there's enough room, certainly in all of Scarborough and certainly in my ward, that we can help our neighbours and help our friends and help our family members who have, for whatever reasons, found themselves in need of these types of services. So I'm simply asking that the staff investigate the feasibility of increasing the shelter in Scarborough Centre from 49 beds to 100 beds, and I want to make sure that the appropriate social services and mental health support services are there as well, because again, many of the people who are there, they're not new, I'll call it, to the system. They have lost their housing, or they've been evicted, or there's a whole long list of reasons why they're there, but we need to make sure that when they're way out there in Scarborough, in that isolated, sleepy industrial area, that they actually are able to get connected up with social supports, with housing, with job counseling, and certainly with mental health services. I think the staff, when I were there, said we really need people here who have experience and confidence with mental health services. So, Madam Speaker, I know none of us would want to see ourselves or our family members using these services. Respite centres are a place of last resort. We have to provide them. We should provide them with a decent standard of living and service and support for the people who are in them. And I look forward to working with everyone on this council to adopt and support and implement everything that's been said earlier today so that we help our brothers and sisters living in the city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Filion.
Thank you. I'm glad to support almost all of the great work that's being done here today. The one motion that I have trouble with is Councillor Perks on the rooming houses. I think it's, first of all, it's a major policy decision that's currently part of a process, and it should not just be slid into a report like this. And secondly, I think that rooming houses are not appropriate housing. By definition, they cannot have both a kitchen and a washroom. And this is not code for I don't want poor people living in Willowdale or anything of the sort. In fact, if you took the size of a rooming house unit and made it much larger, put both a washroom and a kitchenette in it, and told every developer in my ward that they had to build that into every condo they built, and made the rent similar to that of rooming houses, and provided some permanency and stability with very low-cost housing, I would vote for that in a minute. I would be glad to be part of that initiative, but this is not an appropriate way to go about this, and I think it's the wrong way to do it. We are, by the way, getting a report from staff at the April meeting of the Planning Committee to deal with affordable housing on a much broader, more comprehensive way, and this motion would preempt a component of that.
Thank you. Councillor Karygiannis. Okay. Yes, but Councillor Pasternak wants to speak after. Councillor Karygiannis.
Let him speak.
Okay, Councillor Pasternak, I'm just going at what your request was to me this morning. Councillor Pasternak to speak.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I thought anew. I have two motions. One is broken into four parts. That City Council thank management, frontline staff, partnering agencies, and all support workers for their excellent work in supporting, sheltering, and helping the homeless during a very trying time. We'd like the General Manager to go back and take a look at the publication Guide to Services for People Who Are Homeless. I can furnish them a copy that hasn't been updated in 4 years. We'd like to build on the partnership that we've just established with the province of Ontario to establish, to expand and build on the medical presence in 5 locations to provide various support services either primary care or mental health supports as well. And of course, I had a wonderful tour up at Veterans Canada in the Family Support Unit, which deals with homeless veterans, and they work very closely with the Royal Canadian Legion, and I think it's crucial for us to work with the veterans that come to our city shelters and make sure that they know about the support services that are available through Veterans Canada and through the Royal Legion. I would also like to move a motion to make a minor amendment to Councillor Fletcher's motion based on the questions that were asked of the mover. My amendment makes sure that the Deputy City Manager and Turbo Corporate Services works in conjunction with Create TO. If you're wondering what Create TO is, it is a new real estate agency. And one of the reasons, if you have a problem with the name, you'll have to go speak to the Deputy City Manager. But one of the reasons we created a centralized real estate entity was to make sure that our divisions were not flying off into all different separate directions and doing their own real estate bidding. And I think that's the risk of Councillor Fletcher's original motion. So we want to make sure that we've made it clear we want our new real estate entity to play a leadership role in that. I'd like to thank the Mayor for making this a key item, because I don't think there's any disagreement that homelessness, shelter, and housing is one of the great challenges that we're facing in the city today. Imagine, if you will, 6,000 people needing some kind of shelter on a nightly basis in our extreme weather conditions, and this population being the most vulnerable, displaced, and challenged in our city. And it actually is a testament to the staff and the work that they're doing that we've been able to succeed in this kind of environment. And many of the comments that I've seen in the media from various councillors that our system is failing is really not a fair reflection of the hard work that is being done across the city. We are sheltering more people than ever before. We are saving more lives than ever before. We're providing more supports than ever before. And it is important to understand that while the pressure on our shelters is a housing issue, I don't think there's any disagreement that it's also a health issue. Mental wellness, substance abuse, medical complications. It is important to realize, and I think we can all agree, that we can set up 10,000 beds tomorrow morning, but unless we address the fundamental problems and challenges in the medical field that are affecting many of these people, we will not solve the problem. In December of 2017, Council passed a series of motions, I think 26 motions. There's another series of motions coming today, and of course, Community Development and Recreation has been most robust in sending direction to staff. Based on what's passed today, based on what's passed in Council from December, and of course what's been done in the committee work earlier this month, I think that staff have their marching orders. They have a roadmap to reform and build and better our shelter system, and making sure that we work not only on the reactive and preventative side, but on the policy side and the health side. I have been to Seton House, Peter Street, and I've worked with the Out of Coal program at Beth Emmet. I have listened, I have learned, and I can tell you that we have major challenges ahead. But I also have confidence in our staff that they can work with the direction that we've set here at Council, that we've set here in committee, and they can take the pieces, all those pieces of the puzzle, and come back with us with a strong strategy and roadmap for the future. And it'll be up to us in the budgetary process to make sure they have the funding to make it happen. I think we have to look a generation down the road very quickly. Three of my 4 kids don't live in the city anymore. And one of the reasons is the cost of housing. And we're going to see a whole generation of people who move out of this city.
Thank you, Councillor Pasternak. Thank you.
Thank you.
Councillor Karygiannis.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Really appreciate the opportunity to join in this debate. Certainly, we do have a problem across the city, and that problem is immense. And some people say that we dropped the ball on it back in December. However, we're making great strides to make sure that all the aspects of the homelessness and the people that live in the city with problems is addressed. However, I cannot but help but speak about the motion number 3, which is put forward by Councillor Gord Perks, that it states that we should by April 5th, 2018 meeting on the proposed amendments of the city zoning bylaw to make rooming houses a permitted use citywide. Madam Speaker, right now as we speak, there was a pilot project, and that pilot project encompasses Councillor Shelley Carroll's ward, mine, Councillor Chin Lee's ward, and my colleague to my right, Councillor Norm Kelly's ward. And certainly there's some other areas in Scarborough, Councillor Jim Hart's ward, and there were meetings that were held there. And when the meetings were held, people were very upset. To one point, there was, matter of fact, almost a fist fight. People do not want rooming houses in Scarborough. That's been clearly demonstrated and spoken about. And I'm asking my colleagues not to support this motion, as it's something that, although in some areas might be useful in the older city of Toronto, but certainly in North York, Scarborough, and Etobicoke, this councillors asking their constituents will find out that our constituents are adamant against this. I did a survey in my ward, house to house, and we asked people to respond and send comments in, and over 98% of the people in my area do not want rooming houses. So although I listened to what the councillor is trying to do by making sure that rooming houses in his part of the world are there to serve his constituents, certainly rooming houses in my part of the world, instead of adding to the fabric, it will be destroying the fabric of our neighbourhoods. So I ask councillors not to support this and certainly make sure that it doesn't pass.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll to speak.
Madam Speaker, I had intended to let others who have spoken so well to this cover me, but in his zeal, my good friend and colleague Councillor Karygiannis has gone a little too far. The issue in some wards, in my own ward, no punches were thrown, but the issue around rooming houses is not that there should never be any outside of the already approved very specific zones, but that the pilot method under which we intended to introduce them was really not fully baked yet. It was a solution to our problem that I think the head of ML&S would freely admit was about 3/4 baked. There are some controversies about how we proceed with rooming houses when we get out into the suburban, post-secondary campus areas where they're needed by students, heaven knows, but where they can also serve those looking for the types of housing that Councillor Perks describes. So as much as we want to see it, the issue really is that we need to let Ms. Cook do that work. She has given you a timeline for returning with a better way of introducing and piloting in the suburbs, and not to do so means that those very people who need to be welcomed into communities would not be welcomed, because if we pass the bylaw today, that report would give short shrift to the work that Ms. Cook is doing to make sure that when we do proceed into the suburbs, we have a pilot and a way of introducing this new use that can be widely adopted throughout the city. I hope it's ready sooner rather than later. I simply wish to follow Ms. Cook's timelines rather than my good friend Councillor Perks' much more rushed timeline. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. So that's it for the speakers. We'll go to the Mayor. Last speaker. Mayor Tory.
Well, Madam Speaker, thank you. And I want to say thank you to the members of Council for what I think has been a very thoughtful debate. You know, we have some that are more thoughtful than others, I'll say, and I think this one has been. And I want to in particular say, and it's going to be the theme of my own brief remarks, that I'm glad that a number of the speeches have turned their minds to what goes beyond this plan here. You know, I said earlier today to the media, you have to be honest about these things, and this has been probably of all the issues that you face in the job that I have, which is not that dissimilar to the jobs that all of us have in this room, but mine, I have citywide responsibilities, and this has been the most difficult and complex issue that I have faced among many that often seem difficult and complex, and that has nothing to do with the political complexity of it. It's politically complex in some respects too, but rather the frustration and sometimes even the helpless feeling that you have in trying to, to here in this place with the resources we have or don't have, craft some kind of solution that is sensitive, that is effective, and that is permanent. Because in the end, we're spending time, even today, what we're looking at here, and this is the point that's been made by a number of the speakers in most recent hours, is something that is meant to look after people, but to sort of tide them over pending better answers. You know, I can say, Madam Speaker, for my own part, I tried in the summer months to get, even in the spring months, to get well ahead of this. And when I say I did, working with our staff and others, Councillor Deputy Mayor Bylaw, to have a plan that was going to be effective for the winter months with extra respite accommodations and new shelter beds, some of which were replacing ones that had been taken out, but others were going to be genuinely new stretching into this year. And the bottom line is that it proved not to be enough. We ended up in a situation where, notwithstanding best efforts and good faith intentions, the bottom line was pretty straightforward, what we had planned and what we did, because in fact, you know, the proof on these things is really that you actually implemented the plan you had, and we actually did. The plan that was approved here was implemented, and I should say, just as a sidebar, and a number of other people have mentioned it, I think that while you might argue about the adequacy of the plan, and clearly the fact we're here supplementing it is an indication that it turned out not to be adequate, our staff, in being nimble and being able to respond to a demand that increased in some respects, at a pace and in a way that was different than some people expected because of the weather and because of other factors we've discussed, did a terrific job. And they worked hard and they worked every day. I mean, I know I was talking to them absolutely every day at all hours of the day and night, as were others, and they did a great job. And that staff description is meant to extend to the people, of course, in the agencies who have so much to do with this. So we have a series of next steps encompassed in this motion, based in part on a letter signed by a number of councillors who, let's say, have a keen focus for a number of different reasons on housing and homeless related issues. And they are next steps intended to leave us in a situation where we're better resourced with better quality shelter accommodation. Because look, I've been around, as Councillor DeBaeremaeker, Deputy Mayor DeBaeremaeker was saying. I was at his shelter as recently as last week, and that's one of many visits that I've made and have spent my time talking to people and seeing what you see when you get there. And I'm not satisfied with the adequacy of that accommodation. We put things in place that were meant to be for an urgent situation, which more than arose beyond our expectations, and I'm not satisfied myself with the adequacy of those accommodations. But the point that I wanted to emphasize, which others have said as well, is that we will, I hope, approve these measures today and get on with the job of implementing these things, but that they mustn't take our attention off the longer term, bigger issue, which is the absolute lack of affordable and supportive housing. And one thing, again, to repeat what others have made reference to, that when I've been in these shelters, and I have been in many numerous visits over the course of this winter, let alone before, there are a great many people, I would argue the majority, who will, on a voluntary basis, indicate that they have or had experienced mental health and addiction, or both, issues, and that they are not getting the support they need in shelters. Shelters were not ever intended, at least in their current format, and I was heartened, as I said earlier on, by the announcement we made with the Minister of Health made it, really. We were there just to support what he was doing to finally embed some medical people, medical resources in shelters, but it's nowhere near enough. I was with a man at Peter Street who said how grateful he was on the one hand to be at Peter Street, but on the other hand he said he was seeing a psychiatrist once a month, told me totally honestly, and I guess that's a good thing in a way, about the deep bouts of depression that he experienced, but he's seeing a psychiatrist maybe once a month at the shelter. And that's just not going to allow him to be in any position ever to turn his life around from the standpoint of housing. And so I think we're on the right track with this. I think that we are getting some interest and cooperation from Ministers Milchin and Hoskins. I think the federal government is coming back to the table, and the key is whether we're going to be able to mobilize the entire community to take on, yes, these, I'll call them shorter-term measures to make sure we have an adequate supply and quality of shelters, but really, in the end, to address the real issue, which is the supply of affordable housing and supportive housing. And I look forward to addressing that with each and every one of you. And I do, again, thank you for the quality and the constructive nature of the debate today, and hopefully support for this main motion here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we're ready to vote. Is it in numeric order?
It is, except 6B will come
So we'll start. First motion is 1A by Councillor Holiday. All in favor? Recorded? Okay.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Davis. Deputy Mayor Minnan-Wong, thank you.
Councillor Kristyn, please. Councillor Fletcher, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 39 in favor.
Motion 1B by Councillor Holiday. Do we want a recorded vote? Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, please. Councillor Layton. Councillor Peruzza, please.
Councillor Cole, please.
The motion carries 38 to 1.
The next motion is motion 6B by Councillor Pasternak, amending Councillor Fletcher's motion 2. So Councillor Pasternak, 6B, recorded vote. I was told everybody wants a recorded vote. This is just the amendment, yes.
Councillor Peruzza, please. Councillor Layton. Councillor Davis, please.
The motion carries unanimously, 40 in favor.
Okay, so the next one is motion 2 by Councillor Fletcher as amended. Recorded vote.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
Councillor Grimes, please.
The motion as amended carries 36 to 4.
Our next motion is motion number 3 by Councillor Perks. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perruzza, please.
Councillor Ainsley, please.
The motion does not carry. The vote is 14 to 26.
Next motion is motion 4 by Councillor Wong-Tam. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Carmichael-Greb.
Councillor Crisanti, please.
The motion carries 38 to 2.
Our next motion is motion number 5 by Councillor DeBaeremaeker. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Karygiannis. Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
The motion carries 38 to 2.
Next motion is motion 6A by Councillor Pasternak. Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Carroll, please. Councillor Perks.
The motion carries 39 to 1.
Item as amended, recorded vote.
Councillor Carroll, please. Councillor Lee. Councillor Perruzza.
The item as amended carries unanimously, 40 in favor.
Okay, so one down. Our next item is the mayor's second key item, which is on page 4, EX 30.5, tax policy tools to support businesses. Do we have any questions? Councillor Fragadakis.
Thanks, Madam Speaker. On page 10 of the report, it notes that it's further recommended that Council discontinue the policy of removing properties from the capping and clawback system once they have reached their full CVA level of taxation, such that the 2018 capping limit apply to any property that has experienced a property tax increase of greater than 10% over 2017 annualized taxes, regardless of whether the property had reached its full CVA level of taxation in a prior year. This ensures that the same level of protection against large tax increases is avoided to all properties. I was trying to understand the impacts that recommendation may have on typical small businesses. How many businesses would this affect?
Through the Speaker, Councillor, we anticipate that about 5,000 or so properties would be at that level and would be the beneficiaries of the proposed capping mechanism that we're recommending.
So what sort of impacts might it have on the taxes for those businesses?
The proposal that's before you would limit the quantum of the increase to a maximum of 10%, so that no business would experience anything beyond a 10% increase in the tax.
So the 10%, what does that come out to in dollars?
Oh, it varies across businesses. It's really 10% of the previous year's tax liability. So if a business, for example, had a liability of $5,000, the tax increase would not be greater than $500.
Okay. I note that in Table 1, 131 businesses had a tax increase of greater than 100%. So did we know anything about these increases in advance?
We do know that the primary properties that are within that category are typically neighborhood retail, and so we have some visibility as to the types of businesses and the types of properties they occupy.
So was there a mechanism that would have allowed us to try to address this?
It really arose out of the last reassessment in 2017, and I think we would have had that information back in 2017. Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't. If you had it,
we would have had that information available to us in 2017, last year.
So you did have it.
We're just acting upon it as part of this report that's before you.
Okay, I'll chat with you offline.
Thank you. Councillor Campbell, questions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. So as I gather, we intend to cap. Well, first the question is how was 10% arrived at as a threshold to cap the increase?
So we have very limited tools that are available to us by regulation. One of them is a capping mechanism, and the province has enabled municipalities to utilize a 10% cap, and that really is the only available tool that we currently have before us.
So there's no financial impact because these properties, which will only pay a 10% increase, the foregone revenue is brought back to the city by others not having a significant decrease. What's the monetary amount?
Through the Speaker, yes, we do claw back the properties that would have been entitled to a decrease, and the clawback rate varies. We expect to have the final clawback rate at the time we introduce the education tax component next year.
So maybe I'm not clear. So I guess the question is how much will these businesses save by having a cap of 10%, and conversely, how much will others
Sure.
pay more? Yeah.
So our estimates is in the order of about $10 million.
10 million. Okay. All right. Okay. I think that's it for my questions. And so and it said that the increases are these will be implemented. They'll be over a 4-year period of 10%, 10%, 10%. Is that right?
Yes. Over the next 3 years, we anticipate that would happen, but Council will have to revisit its this policy again in 2019 and implement it for the 2019 taxation year.
Decreases, it says, are immediate. They're not phased in, right? Like somebody who's receiving a decrease in their taxes, that's immediate, right? Is that correct?
Well,
if your taxes are going down, it's not phased in over 4 years. It's
the decreases are, some of the decreases clawed back to fund
Right.
the capping mechanism.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Mihevc.
Yes, thank you. I'm wondering, are these tax adjustments within the class of commercial and therefore revenue neutral, or are they going to be at the end of the day a hit on the amount of revenue that we take in which case you are kind of treating it as as not taking an increase in assessment?
Through the speaker.
If you get my meaning.
Yes, of course. The recommendations that are before you are effectively revenue neutral, and they're funded within the class.
Within that class.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. That's very important. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Wong-Tam.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. Through you to staff, with respect to the current value assessments that property owners received, do you know if they were timely passed along to the tenants that may be responsible for the property taxes? Because the bill would normally go to the property owner, correct?
So yes, the liability rests with the property owner, and the property owner may have an agreement to lease their property, and in the vast majority of the cases, property taxes are passed on to the tenant in the form of a net lease.
And would it surprise you that that some of the commercial tenants were not notified that by their property owner that they have these substantial jumps in taxes?
Through the speaker, I really don't have any visibility on these private matters, but I have certainly I've heard that in fact that has been the case in some instances.
Yeah, and so when that happens and the tenants are not prepared for the significant hikes in property taxes, or even the property owner themselves, oftentimes they are they may miss the opportunity to file for the reconsideration, which is in essence to reassess the property again by impact. Is that correct? Sometimes they miss the period.
Certainly, that is a distinct possibility.
And if the assessment values go up by 100 or 200 or 300 or 400 or 500% in the cases of Yonge Street and some of the other growth areas, then they're really out of luck. Is that correct?
Yes.
So there is no other recourse. Like once you miss that appeal period to file for the request for reconsideration, there is no other option.
To my knowledge, there is an ability to go to the Assessment Review Board for the next year, for the following year.
But that is a fairly onerous process, correct?
It's time-consuming and it is somewhat costly.
And when property owners feel like they need to fight the assessment value, even after the request for reconsideration, they want to be able to sort of challenge it once again. Oftentimes, are they able to do it on their own as individuals, or do they generally need to hire some tax experts, some auditor types of financial professionals to give them assistance? How many of these property owners are doing it on their own? Or how many of them are hiring some costly professionals?
So clearly, I do not have a clear answer with respect to that. However, it strikes me as, in the vast majority of the cases, expertise is being retained in the form of property assessors, lawyers, to review the assessment and to appeal the assessment.
And have you heard of property owners expressing concern about the cost of these professionals who may be hired on contingencies based on the valuation of the taxes that come down in price, that they may get a percentage of that as opposed to a flat fee of filing?
So there are certainly different mechanisms for the retainers and the cost, and one of them could be in the form of a success payment.
Based on the historical trends of land values in Toronto, would you say that during this period of reassessment every 4 years through impacts that we've seen probably the biggest jump that we have in some since the implementation of CVA, which is back in 1998?
So in fact, I have experienced at least 4 reassessments since the implementation of CVA, and I would suggest to you that the last reassessment has had a considerable variability.
And so if the report was not before us today and the findings and your recommendation was not adopted by City Council today, what do you think would be the impact of property to the property owners who don't get a 10% cap, who qualify, you know? What would happen to those 5,000 property owners?
Yeah. Well, clearly there would be a substantial impact from a tax liability perspective that may impact their viability from a business perspective.
Do you think they'll be able to stay in business or continue to retain their properties if we weren't able to give them this tiny little bit of reprieve?
Certainly it has substantial negative implications on those property owners.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Burnside.
Thank you, through you, Madam Speaker. So it looks like about 12% of the properties, the assessed properties, are in a position of facing increases in their property value from greater than 10%. Is that correct?
Through the Speaker, that is in fact correct. Yes.
Yeah, 12%. Okay. So over time, have you looked over time? So they're not; those 12% won't see anything greater than 10%. So then the other 88% won't see the reduction that would be commensurate with their decreased assessment. Correct?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. Have you looked at the impacts of that over time? If you have an extremely hot area, be it Yonge Street, be it Bayview, wherever that may be, over a number of assessment periods versus an area that has never been hot, have you looked at the impact that would have in terms of paying taxes that are somewhat in line with the assessed value of the property? Because over time, that's going to be out of whack, right?
Yes. Through the Speaker, of course, that will happen. However, what we're doing here is introducing this as an interim measure for 2018, and pending an exploration of a more targeted approach to providing relief. And so this is not a long-term measure. Okay. It's simply provided just to cushion the impact in 2018.
Okay, thank you. So have we looked at, if we looked at residential properties, what percentage of residential properties are in a situation of having their taxes increased more than 10%?
So the report that's before you deals with commercial properties. These are CAT properties. We can certainly get the information related to residential, and we do not have the same latitude that is afforded to commercial in terms of capping property taxes on the residential sector.
So we don't have that same tool, but we might have the same problem.
Absolutely, yes. We do have, in fact, the same problem.
Interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza, questions?
Yeah, I'm just trying to understand this. Is this the capping and clawback that's sort of was imposed when we moved to the new assessment system, market value assessment, and is that still that still hasn't fully worked its way through? Is that where we are? Is that what this is?
So yes, this is an enhancement of what we had previously adopted in the form of capping. So previously what we had done is cap properties until they've reached CVA, full CVA, and then they weren't afforded the same protections once a property reaches full CVA. What this does, what the recommendations before you do, is enhance that capping to also include properties that have reached full CVA.
Okay, so just explain that to me one more time. So all the so when we move to okay, they call it current value assessment, right? CVA. So when we moved to when the Harris government changed our assessment system from whenever to current value assessment, they basically imposed a capping and clawback system so that the properties that were spiking wouldn't get those big increases all at once, and the properties that were supposed to get those big reductions didn't get them all at once. So the people that were overpaying for years sort of carried the freight for the people that would be receiving the big increases. And I understand that. So those properties have all now 100% fully reached current value assessment, correct?
No, far from it.
No?
Up until last year, about 80% of the properties had reached full CVA, and 20% had yet to reach full CVA. That's 20 years after the implementation of current values.
Okay, so you still have 20% of the commercial industrial properties out there that are not at their 100% of their current value assessment. So for those properties, you're suggesting that now we limit the increases for those that would otherwise be going up to a 10%, correct? And so that limits that. Then who pays the freight, the residential?
No, it's in fact, through the Speaker, it's revenue neutral in the sense that those properties within the commercial and industrial class that were eligible for decreases, we simply claw back a small amount to the decrease to fund the capped properties.
So I understand now. So 20% of the properties out there that are not at their full CVA, that would include a number of properties that would otherwise be receiving or should have been receiving reductions 20 years ago. They're still basically picking up some of the freight because we're basically reducing the spike for those people that would otherwise be getting the increases.
Through the Speaker, yes, in a nutshell, that will be the case.
So they've been doing this for 20 years. They've been paying beyond where they should have been, and we're just going to simply expand that for some more years for them. How many more years are we talking about?
It's very difficult to assess that, and the reason being is that the market values change over time.
I understand that.
And so, eventually we are going to reach a situation where most properties will be at CVA. I can't give you the precise date, but it's certainly less than a decade.
So I guess by way of a last question, what does that 20% represent in terms of our overall commercial industrial assessment?
Well,
like in real numbers, like assessment dollars.
So I'm looking at the tax experts over there, and they really don't have an answer, but we can certainly provide you with that information.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Carroll, questions?
Oh, Madam Speaker, my questions have been asked elsewhere. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Holliday, questions?
Yes, thank you, Speaker. So properties are assessed every 4 years, correct?
Through the Speaker, yes.
Is that a rolling bunch of them happen every 4 years, or do we have a tranche, all the properties come through every 4 years and then we work it out?
All properties in Ontario are assessed at the same time every 4 years.
Okay, so we see this coming. We've imposed this 10% control on what the bill to the property owner can increase by. What does that translate to like a change in value of assessment? So if I own a building and it goes up by 10%, that doesn't mean I get a 10% jump on my taxes. What order of magnitude of increase on my property would it have to be to, I'm just saying empirically, would it have to be to trigger a 10%? Something big, I think.
Sure. So, through the Speaker, if we take the commercial property tax class as an example, that in the last reassessment increased on average by 30%.
Right.
So if a property, in fact, increases considerably higher than that 30%, it will attract an increase in taxation.
Right. So 30 was the water line across the city. So if you got 30, you were doing average. If you got less, you actually got a decrease in taxes. And if you had something astronomically past 30% in 4 years, you were one of the landlords that got the big tax bill.
Correct, yes.
Okay. So to me, if I was a landlord and I said my building doubled in value in 4 years, would I not want to appeal that finding to say, you know, how could this be? What has changed? Has the real estate market truly changed that much? Did we have this big rush of landlords going out there to say, no, please reassess me to something more reasonable, here's evidence?
So I'm going to ask the Director of Revenue Services, Mr. Brendan, to respond to that. He deals with appeals.
Through you, Madam Speaker, the question is the assessment appeals, the assessment appeals that are lodged would be a question of the owner appealing. Sorry, help me with the what am I answering?
Well, basically, you know, if I'm a landlord and I got this massive tax bill because I had this massive increase on the value of my property in 4 years, and you know, looking around the neighborhood, not much has changed. Would it not be in my interest to appeal that CVA? To say, you know, come on, Impact, like you've assessed me something crazy here. Why would you do this?
Yes, it's through you, Madam Speaker. It is certainly within an owner's right to appeal their assessment. However, you have to prove before the Assessment Review Board that your property is inequitably assessed in relation to similar properties. So if all similar type properties had these massive increases, you would have to argue that somehow your property was different.
So was there activity on that, or is there some other advantage to having a highly assessed value property? Like, you know, I can go to the bank with that and get a bigger mortgage, or leverage that somehow. Is there some reason why I'd happily pay a little bit more tax, pass it on to my tenants?
In fact, we understand from MPAC that in fact the increases in CVA have actually been validated because of sales that have happened since. So the Yonge Street properties, where they increased substantially, those assessment appeal increases were substantiated by actual sales of the property that indicated that in fact the value had in fact gone up by that much.
Okay, because there was turnover. Okay, I'm going to try to squeeze 2 questions in here really quick because we're short on time. Can anyone comment, is there a geospatial disbursement that's of interest on this particular file? Like, is there a hot spot in the city where this is happening, it's not anywhere else, or is it kind of peppered across the map?
So our observations suggest it's throughout the city, but focused primarily along the Yonge Street corridor.
Good enough. And long-term wise, is this sustainable? You mentioned this is an interim measure. I get it. We've got to do something about what has happened in instances of extreme changes. But mathematically, are we getting ourselves into a trap where the values will continue to go, and we'll be faced with this question? Soon it'll be 20%, 30%, maybe it'll be less. It'll be 5% the cap. Where do you see this going in the long future, and how do you think we're going to manage it as a council? This is the easier decision. It's the one 10 years from now that worries me.
That was your last question.
Thank you.
Certainly. So, through the chair, we are looking at a number of measures, and we want to engage the province in terms of potentially looking at the assessment system, how MPAC values properties, looking at potentially different tax classes, and we will be coming back with a more sustainable solution to the issues before us. As I mentioned earlier, this is simply an interim measure to afford some protection to those property owners that are facing substantial increases.
Thank you. Okay, that's it for the questions. We'll now go to the speakers. Councillor Wong-Tam to speak.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to table a motion, please. My motion is to simply delete recommendation number 2 and to replace it with a new recommendation, and simply is to have the staff to do some broad consultation and to bring back a report in July rather than having the report come back in the first quarter of 2019. The intention of the motion, Madam Speaker, is to make sure that we can actually get the work done quicker, so we don't miss a taxation year, just as much as staff have responded saying that this is an interim measure. It's only a one-year response. During our meeting at the Executive Committee, when I asked staff whether or not they were able to do this work faster and what's the quickest they can respond back, they said July. So I'm taking it at face value that we can get this work done and a report back to the Executive Committee in July. Madam Speaker, this issue is so important around how we do the best that we can to preserve small businesses on character main streets. Many of us have probably watched signs go up on Yonge Street that talked about a tax revolt, that they are struggling to make ends meet already, especially with the onslaught of different ways of shopping that people have today, whether it's web-based businesses or what have you. But Yonge Street is also the most heavily pedestrianized street in Toronto. 42 million people marching north and south on Yonge Street every single year. So pedestrian activity, we have plenty of. We have quite a... Madam Speaker,
hold on. Sorry, Councillor Wong-Tam. Your mic is on, and Councillor Perruzza, we could hear you. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. So my point is that Yonge Street is a very heavily pedestrianized street, and even then the property owners and the small business operators are finding it difficult to make ends meet. And when you throw in something that's uncertain as a massive tax hike because of a flawed assessment process by the province, this actually shakes everyone to their foundation. And interestingly enough, it's actually not simply Yonge Street. This is happening in every single major area that has growth, whether it's Yonge and Eglinton or perhaps in North York along the Yonge-Finch corridor, even along King and Spadina. It is happening everywhere. And I was actually hearing from businesses all over the city based on what they were seeing that was happening in my local community. So by way of passing this motion and adopting the staff recommendations, we're actually just taking our time to find another landing place. So this is just one step. Our next step is to find a more permanent solution, and that is going to require us doing broad consultation. CVA was implemented in the province of Ontario in 1998, and I think that, you know, with all the best intentions, they've created a system that is flawed. And we're not going to be able to reform CVA today, not from this particular chamber. That requires a conversation with the province. But things that we can do, that I know that is within the realm of possibility, is to try to create a small business classification tax. Now, how that is going to be structured and what that looks like, we're going to have to really roll up our sleeves and get very creative. But if we don't do it, Madam Speaker, my big fear is that what is happening on Yonge Street is going to happen in many other neighborhoods. And we know that this growth is not slowing down anytime soon, especially not with these massive speculative land values and transactions that are taking place. So let's talk about CVA just for 1 second, Madam Speaker. 3 methodologies to arrive at a valuation of property. One is comparable approach, one is the income approach, and one is the replacement approach. Interestingly enough, in theory, all 3 of those methodologies to evaluate real estate should bring you to the same conclusion in value. But interestingly enough, because of the wild speculation of land and because the optimal and highest and best use approach when it comes to the comparable sales in arriving at a valuation for CVA, it does not line up. And yet CVA, through the highest and best use optimal approach for methodologies, is exactly what all the appraisers are using at MPAC. So the algorithms are sending our assessment through the roof, and whether you're a parking lot or a small little mom and pop corner store, you're evaluated in the same way. So that's got to stop. I want to thank staff for their hard work. The motion that Councillor Thompson and I put on the table only happened in December, and they came back with a report back in January. They did some very good work with all of us. I owe them a debt of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you. We do have a question on clarification of the motion. Councillor Holyday.
Yes, thank you, Speaker. Through you to the councillor. I wonder if I could just get some clarity on the term broad public consultation and confirmation that it doesn't include the residential property class, because I think we're really getting into something different if it's that broad.
Yeah, it's not intended to deal with residential properties.
Okay, so public consultation, broad or not, but focused on the commercial property tax class.
Correct. We wanted to just simply go beyond the traditional stakeholders when it comes to commercial properties. So that would also include the smaller property owners that may not be engaged through some larger agencies or associations.
Understood. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kristyn to speak.
Well, thank you, Speaker, and I'll keep my remarks brief. I just want to begin by thanking our staff in financial services. They don't always get the recognition from the floor of council, so Casey and Adir and Mike and, of course, Joe, our CFO, for their work, as well as our EDC staff under Mike Williams. I thought Councillor Holyday alluded to the real challenge in his questions very well, which is long-term, what we're doing here is not the solution. Long-term, we are dealing with a broken assessment model, which is not in the city's purview. And the broken assessment model, under current value assessment with highest and best use, it doesn't work in a successful city. That's, as Councillor Wong-Tam was referring to, in a successful city with land values and speculation driving them up, the assessment model we have pushes out many of the enterprises and the uses in the buildings we're seeking to protect. And so when you have 401 Richmond in my ward that's being taxed at a commercial rate on a highest and best use as if they were a Gap and a Starbucks, as opposed to 159 arts and cultural nonprofits and enterprises, that's broken. When you have a French restaurant, Le Select Bistro, that owns a two-story building on Wellington being taxed as if they were a 12-story condo, then it's broken. Or when you have King and Spadina heritage buildings that we at the city are trying to protect and conserve that are being taxed as if they were 40-story condo towers, thus creating a disincentive to keep the heritage which we are saying we want, the model is broken. And so the assessment model is what needs to be fixed. But that's not in our purview. So how do we use fiscal policy as a tool for city building? I think what's being brought here today with capping and clawbacks is a critical and important first step. I think what's coming forward to Executive Committee next week as part of the budget deliberations for the new Creative Co-locations facilities tax class is an important first step. But our work to ensure that, as Councillor Holyday spoke to, the long term to deal with the assessment model of the province is where we ought to go. But that does not take away from the important steps we're taking here today as a city. And I want to reiterate again my thanks to our staff in finance for making this happen.
Thank you. Councillor Troisi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Downtown small business in particular have been hard hit with tax increases in recent years. We know the issues relates to the current value assessment by impact for properties being based on highest values in the area, which often are based on residential condominium developments. The vibrant residential community in the downtown core is a good thing for small business. It provides local customers who can shop near to home. But the unintended knock effect of skyrocketing small business property assessments due to the land value of nearby condominium development is suffocating many of our owners. I support the tax cap measures for small businesses in 2018 and for staff to continue to look at mitigation measures to fairly tax those important players in our vibrant downtown. Thank you, staff.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza to speak.
Hold on. Thank you so much, Speaker. Speaker, you know, I look at the title here, and it says, Tax Policy Tools to Support Businesses. Nothing could be further from the truth than that statement right there on this particular issue. And I'll tell you why. When we went to current, and by the way, I'm not a fan of current value assessment. I understand that, okay? And I understand the inequities, the sort of the inherent unfairnesses that system basically introduces into our tax regime for people right across the board. But here's what's been happening with this particular issue. Some 20 years ago, the Mike Harris government moved the system from an antiquated assessment system based on 1940 values to current value. You all know what happened. Properties downtown in the city of Toronto basically, you know, quadrupled overnight in terms of value and in terms of assessment. Their taxes went from $700, $800 to $3,000, $3,500, $4,000. They started to carry the freight for the rest of the city. That's what amalgamation did. That's what updating the current value, the taxation system did. But for businesses, for the commercial industrial sector, Harris introduced a form of capping and clawback system. What it basically did, it was those businesses and commercial properties that were supposed to be getting these massive increases, those increases were leveled off. Those businesses that had been overpaying for years, since 1940, for years and years and years, that had been paid way beyond where they should have been under the system, those businesses basically were told, you got to carry the freight for those other guys almost forever in some cases. Now, I agreed with that earlier on. I understand that. In some cases, the increases would have been through the roof. So you say, okay, give them a little time to adjust. But 20 years? And then 20 years later, we're still saying 20% of those people still haven't reached that sort of the level of fairness, that equity in the system. Let's continue it some more so that those people who have been overpaying in the commercial, industrial, property classes for decades and decades, what this tells them today is, you know what? You still overpay. Way beyond where some of those other decreases would be. We need to bring this to closure. We need to bring it to a place where everybody pays on the basis of their value. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter whether you're downtown Yonge Street or downtown Scarborough. Why should downtown Scarborough or the suburbs in Scarborough or North York or other places that have been carrying the freight on this one for 2 decades now, we're saying to them, you still got to continue to carry the freight here. You still got to continue to overpay because we refuse to give those other people who should be paying more those increases, passing those increases on to them. We need to bring this to a closure. We need to set a clock to it, and we need to bring everybody to an even, equitable, fair place. Because what we're doing here is not fair. So a title that says tax policy tools to support businesses, yes, support some businesses in some areas, to the detriment of others in other places that have been overtaxed, overpaying for decades. We're going to continue that. And that's not right.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson to speak.
Thank you very much, Speaker. I too want to offer my thanks first to my councillor mate, Councillor Wong-Tam, who took up this issue. I recall there was an article, I believe it was in the Toronto Star, where the councillor was, I think she was pictured in the Star, and she had made mention about the impact that this was having on some of her business and so on, and recognizing that clearly, whether or not it was Yonge Street, Bloor Street, or Bathurst, or any other area in the city, what was actually happening is that a provincial agency mandated by provincial policies were having a major effect on our main street, essentially killing our businesses because of the assessment of the properties that these businesses were utilizing in order to create jobs, create opportunities within the city. And these are business owners, small, medium-sized businesses that have been in business for many, many years. And in fact, because of the policies of the MCAP system, the need to, if you will, assess values at such a rate that it was based on the highest and best use, which typically means residential, and these are businesses that are trying to survive on a daily basis. I'm in agreement with what's here. I would have liked to have done more, but I think the staff have come to a very rational position where they say we certainly want to see a cap on the businesses that has been assessed in a tax increase that's greater than 10%, and so we are trying to impact that and try to affect that. We've dealt with situations in the past, Speaker, which were rather one-off, and I recall the one that we dealt with some time ago was with Red Patch Sugar. We were dealing with that company, and it had been in Toronto on the waterfront, such a landmark business for such a long time. They, in fact, were going to close up shop and leave the City of Toronto because of this increase with respect to the current value assessment and the impact on their taxes to be paid to the city and so on. So we were about to lose many, many jobs. I remember working with Mr. Williams and the staff and finance and others as well, and the local councillor of the day, the late Pam McConnell, and the efforts that we made in order to ensure that we could actually find a way through a process. And of course we had to go on our knees to point of fact to MCAP to say, look, you know, this wasn't right, here are the things that we need to do. Yes, they were able to help us and so on. But I think we've learned the lesson, and the lesson is this. We cannot kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, which are the small businesses in this city that are creating the majority of jobs that are opportunities for people to be able to have a place to go and work, and for us to be able to not having to shelter more people because they're in need of shelter because they can't find jobs, or to provide more services through Toronto Employment and Social Services and so on. I think that has an effect, it has an impact. So I think it's important for us to demonstrate to the small businesses in this city that we want to help them, and to demonstrate or to point out to the provincial government when they simply say there's nothing we can do about it, it doesn't make a lot of sense to me. And I say this because I know I've had numerous discussions, I'm sure other members of council and maybe the mayor has had as well, with the province about the impact of the CVA and how it's actually affecting our businesses and so on. And so we do have to stand up, we do have to fight for our businesses, we do have to help them, because we know if we don't help them, what we will see is very much the example as to what occurred a number of years ago, probably about maybe 9 years ago, to the corner of Bathurst, basically, and Front Street. We had lots of businesses there, and pretty well overnight, they all had to close down or move elsewhere because of the CVA, current value assessment. Because all of a sudden, but it was overnight that the value of those businesses, the assessed value of those businesses, had increased so dramatically that the businesses there could not afford to pay the taxes and so on. And so this is the road that we're actually going down and so on. Unless we do something about it, clearly those businesses on Main Street are not going to be there. We'll be finding that the highest and best use offer is what's going to be there. And in essence, we're going to lose the opportunity of the jobs in the city. We're going to lose the vibrancy of our Main Street. And I think it's time that the provincial government, through its agency, MCAP, recognize the impact that this is actually having on in our city. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. So that's it for the speakers. We'll go to the mayor, or Tory.
Well, Madam Speaker, again, I think this has been a quality debate, though I would say through you to Councillor Perruzza, only that I hope he was facing either north or east when he made his remarks. North, if he wanted to direct them properly where they belong, which is at Queen's Park, or east would be an acceptable second choice because that's where the MPAC headquarters is. Because what we're really dealing with here today, Madam Speaker, is a poor assessment policy, a very poor assessment policy. It's been poor for a long time. You know, when I was a provincial politician, I really got to the point where I was so fed up and so frustrated with MPAC and its inflexibility and its insensitivity and its awkwardness in terms of actually dealing with reality that I sort of came to the conclusion that what I called at the time one of those controlled demolitions was in order, where you actually safely evacuated the people from the building down there in Pickering, I think that's where it is, and then just blew it up. Because, you know, it just requires such fundamental reform. And governments, plural, I think of most parties now, have had the opportunity and not chosen to do so. I think that's coupled with poor assessment administration, and then it's coupled with something that Councillor Wong-Tam, I think, indirectly referred to, and she's right. I mean, the responsibility after that for poor communication probably rests with us too, because the tax bill is a function of the assessment and the tax rate being applied to it. And I guess we might have known, or at least engaged in some degree of dialogue with the businesses that have been so detrimentally affected to sort of say, well, look, this isn't our doing, because most of what's going on here is a function of the assessment, but you know, we are going to do something about it. So here we are, and I think it's not unlike the first item that we dealt with earlier today, which is what we're doing today is not meant to be the answer. In fact, the report, while it gets less attention, quite explicitly says in one of its recommendations that while we implement this 10% cap, which to me is will provide a degree of certainty, a degree of predictability, a degree of relief to many businesses. You know, yes, at a cost to some others, but you know what? I mean, I think in many areas of our life in Toronto and in Canada, we're all in this together. And we want to make sure that overall, just like the health system, where there's some people that use that more than others, but we all pay, that we maintain a healthy business community here. And I think this cap is a fair way in which to do that, but pending the other recommendation, which is that our staff be looking at other options. And even more important than that, I think, we won't have gone too far, to be quite candid, if we don't get some fundamental reform to the assessment policy and law, which at the very least takes into account the fact that not every single piece of property in Toronto is going to be a hotel, an office building, or a condo. We know that. Anybody would know that. But yet the thing works on a kind of one-size-fits-all basis, like it always has, and it causes terrible unfairness to people in the process. And so I just hope that we don't look at today as a conclusion, but rather as a beginning. It's a beginning that provides some shorter-term relief and certainty for people, but that must be accompanied by a will on the part of all of us, as well as our staff, public service staff colleagues, to both pursue other options, and there is a report coming back on that, and to pursue a change to provincial policy, which, like in so many areas, is often so slow to come, if ever. And I pledge myself certainly to work with, as I have. I raised it with the Minister of Finance for Ontario as recently as last week, and we'll continue to raise it and continue to fight on it, and maybe the election gives us an opportunity to make some more progress on that. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Okay, we have one motion by Councillor Wong. But you spoke already. You have okay, sorry. No, you did. I just didn't see you put your name there like at the last minute. I didn't see your name.
You're right,
okay.
My name is too short or something.
Okay, go ahead.
Small. So, Mr. Mayor, am I to understand that you don't agree with this, with this policy, with this direction?
No, I support it. I made it a priority item and have strongly supported doing something along the lines of what we're doing. I simply have said, and it's not that inconsistent with what you said, it's just that you, I think, were directing your comments somehow at people in this room as opposed to other rooms where they could actually change some of this. I just said this is not a permanent solution. Everybody knows that. We all know that. The permanent solution rests in other options that maybe come forward from our public service staff, and certainly as well a change in provincial policy. And that's why I suggested that some of your remarks might more properly be directed north or east, either to MPAC headquarters or Queen's Park.
So you agree that by continuing the system of capping and clawback, that while we continue to charge a lesser rate of tax to businesses or commercial properties that should have been paying more many, many years ago, and we're basically continuing to overcharge a class of properties that basically have been paying more than their fair share for years and years and years. It just continues an inequity in our tax system. You agree with that?
And I'm heartened, Madam Speaker, through you to the member, that our officials have been asked in the second part of the recommendation in this very report to examine all options with respect to our taxation policies to try to make sure that small businesses generally, including some of those you might feel have been unfairly dealt with, are dealt with in a fairer manner. And so I'm assuming they'll look at all options. There's no restriction on what they can look at in the motion that I hope will pass in a moment or two. And so I'm sure we'll hear from them on that.
But you understand as well that we are not bound, as I understand it from our staff, we are not bound to the 10% limit. We can accelerate that. We can create a more level playing field and more fairness in the system by removing that 10%, increasing it to 15 or 20 or 25. We can do that now. We don't have to rely on MPAC. We don't have to rely on anybody to do that.
And Madam Speaker, through you again,
I gave him the wrong information.
Madam Speaker, through you again, I also heard other people talking about the fact we should lower that 10% number. So the bottom line is the 10% is what's been recommended. It's a recommendation I support. The staff are going to have full, open opportunity to look at every other option they wish to recommend to us in order to help small businesses of all kinds across the city, and I'm looking forward to reading that report.
But you would agree, just from a fairness perspective, that if 20 years ago you had a commercial property in Downsview and someone said to you that we're implementing a current value assessment system where you should be, we know you've been overpaying by thousands of dollars.
Councillor Perruzza,
your taxes should come down by thousands of dollars, and someone else's should go up.
Councillor
right?
Perruzza, you keep asking the same question
No,
over and over again.
No, this is actually asking the question, a very different question,
Oh, it's
Speaker.
the same question.
No, not at all.
Madam Speaker, through you, whether it's
it's about fairness, Speaker.
The principle he's talking about is the same, which is, and I understand the system was meant to operate in what I'll call a sort of revenue or assessment neutral basis, where some went up and others went down by the same measure. I understand that's how the system was meant to operate. And again, I repeat what I said. I think our staff now, in being directed by us to look at all options to try and remedy some of the inequities, plural, that have arisen here, will have full opportunity to give us a report when it comes back to us to look at all of these things. But in the meantime, I strongly support not only that request of them, but also the 10% cap, so that businesses that were going to be adversely affected by a combination of tax policy and assessment policy will have a degree of certainty and some degree of relief from what were exorbitant and unacceptable and unbearable tax increases.
Okay, you know what? Lots of words. I'm getting lost in the words. Just to simplify it some, if you had a business out in Scarborough, and someone 20 years ago said to you, you should fairly be paying $10,000 less in taxes than you are today. But then later they came back to you and said, you know what, we're implementing the system, but we're only going to bring your taxes down just a little bit so we can protect someone else from going up. And we've been doing that for 2 decades, and you've been continuing to overpay for 2 decades or more, way beyond when they implemented the system, so that someone else could benefit from that. You think that that's fair? And we should continue that?
That's your last
I
question.
can understand why someone who heard that commentary or those two sets of communications would be frustrated by that. But again, we're going to be implementing the 10% cap for tax bills 1 year over another, so that people will have a degree of relief and certainty. And our staff are now going to look at the policies that you've made reference to and make recommendations to us as to how we can make them fairer for smaller businesses. And I'm very gratified we're going to have that opportunity to review those recommendations.
Thank you. We do have another question. Councillor Matlow.
Just to put it into a nutshell, because speaking of a lot of words, I was getting confused too. Not your words, my colleagues. Do I understand this correctly, that you, along with Councillor Wong-Tam and others, were made aware of significant challenges that some business owners and property owners are facing because of an unfair assessment by a provincial agency? You are asking Council to support recommendations to initially mitigate that impact and work with the provincial government to, in the future, ensure that whatever a best use of that property is, fairly reflects how they're using it today.
Madam Speaker, I would answer just a plain yes to that with just a minor modification. When you say an unfair assessment, I think it turns out to be unfair, but it's really just because they're applying the wrong sort of criteria that don't take into account the realities of small business and the realities of the use of different properties, which are not going to be condo towers or office towers all the way up and down the streets we're talking about. And then the only other thing that I would add is that not only are we going to press for a change to that assessment policy, as others have done before us, but hopefully more successfully, but we're asking our public service to also provide us with other ideas, other options as to things we could do to alleviate the situation you described. But the short answer to your question is yes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's it for the question. So we have one motion by Councillor Wong-Tam. We can put that on the screen. Recorded vote.
Councillor Fletcher, please. Councillor Kristyn, please.
The motion carries 36-2.
Item as amended, on favor, carried. Recorded vote. Oh, you don't? Oh. Okay, Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Perruzza, we're over the debate.
Councillor Perks, please. Councillor Kelly. Councillor Karagianis.
Councillor Fletcher, please.
Councillor Kelly, please.
The item is amended, carries 38-1.
All right, so now we'll go to the top of the agenda. Page 3, EX 2923, Administrative Amendments to Reserve Fund Accounts. Councillor Davis, you held it down. Do you have questions? Does anybody have any questions?
Speaker, I have no questions and I'm going to release it. I did have a motion that I had prepared in consultation with 2 staff people, but I understand from the clerk and you that it's out of order, and so I have tabled a separate notice of motion and I will release this.
Okay, so Councillor Davis is releasing on page 3, EX 2923. All in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Perks, please.
Okay, members, we're in the middle of a vote. Please take your seats.
Councillor Wong-Tam, please.
We're voting on EX 29.23. Okay. Okay, please. It's on your green sheets, page 3.
Councillor Fletcher, when you're seated, please.
Deputy Mayor, please. Now, here. Councillor Perruzza, please. Councillor Perruzza, please.
The item carries 35-2.
Our next item is page 3, ED 25.3, one-year extension of contribution agreements for cultural grant recipients. Councillor Holliday, you held it down. Are there questions to staff?
No questions, Madam Speaker. I thank the
Do
economic
we have,
development
okay, hold on,
staff
hold
for
on.
helping me.
Is
Yep,
there,
letting it go. We're good.
so nobody else has questions? So you're just releasing it?
Yep, I got my questions answered.
Okay, so on the item on favor, carried. Our next item is page 3, ED 25.5, ensuring a robust hotel supplies. Councillor Wong-Tam, you held the item down. Do you have questions?
Yes, I do, Madam Speaker.
Okay, so questions to staff.
Yes, thank you. And through you, Madam
There you
Speaker,
go.
to our yeah.
Okay, just a sec. I'll start your time.
Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Okay, Councillor Wong-Tam.
Madam Chair.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Through you, to our General Manager of Economic Development and Culture, with respect to the number of planning applications that are in the pipeline for approval and for review, many of them are actually now affecting hotels, full-on hotels, and they're proposing to demolish them. Is that correct?
Either demolishing the whole hotel or demolishing part of it, or converting part of it to condominiums.
And how many applications do we have before us that actually affect hotel structures and inventory?
You'd have to ask planning, unless my staff, who's just
Okay,
arriving.
hold on, Councillor Wong-Tam, I have to put your time on hold. It's awfully noisy. Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Pasternak, Councillor DiCiano, please, it's very noisy. Councillor Palacio, please. Okay, thank you. If you can continue. Okay.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
I think it's probably in the order of 20, 15 to 20.
So 15 to 20 hotels in the GTA are currently under some type of application for rezoning for redevelopment.
Sorry, we're talking about the city. Hold on a second.
Okay, I'll put your time on hold.
Planning says they can find the number. They don't have it with them right now.
Not a problem. Should I, Madam
We
Speaker?
want to hold it down?
I think so, Madam Speaker. My
Okay.
time is just leaking away, and I can't seem to.
Okay, let's
staff
hold
need
it
more
down.
time.
Thank you. Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Perruzza, Councillor Pasternak, please. Please. Our next item, page 3, we're going to hold that item down, ED 25.5. Our next item is... Oh, you're ready? Oh, okay. Okay, go ahead.
Yes,
I cleared her time, so I have no idea what time she... 1:11? Okay.
So there are 22 projects that will reduce, that are proposed to reduce the number of hotels rooms in the city.
And so how many rooms will be impacted, and how many of them will be replaced?
The exact number of rooms, I don't know, It would be in the thousands, though.
In the thousands of rooms that we will be losing overall,
Correct.
according to the city's inventory.
Correct. I mean, two that I know of off the top of my head count for well over 2,000.
Okay. And those facilities that we're going to be losing, is there any desire from planning staff at the table to have them replaced? Is that a request that planning staff make?
Through you, Madam Chair, we have raised the issue of replacing hotel rooms. Unfortunately, we don't have an existing policy to require the replacement of hotel rooms.
And so unlike the rental replacement policy that we have at the City of Toronto, where if there are 6 units of residential housing that is being demolished and more, they have to replace it on site, there is no such policy to replace hotel rooms.
No, there's nothing specific on hotel rooms. We just have the policies on replacement of non-residential employment uses.
And so while the applications are being reviewed, and planning staff are raising these concerns with the applicant, asking them to reintroduce the same level of hotel rooms, or perhaps, just a modification of more or slightly less. The response from the applicants, has it been largely favorable? Are they coming back with like for like?
Generally, we are not. We are having applicants who are willing to provide some hotel uses on the site, but generally we're not getting a response with a full replacement.
And this is a question for the General Manager of Economic Development. The trend of hotel rooms in the city, where are they going right now? We're seeing some increase in the GTA, but they're not coming in the downtown area.
So the net number of hotel rooms in the city has remained flat for quite a while now. We've had new hotels open, and they've managed to offset the hotel space that we've lost. But we have no growth. We have very significant growth in the 905.
And so when it comes to attracting large meetings and conventions, where are they most likely to go, these future meetings that we always want to host, if we don't have adequate hotels to service them in downtown or midtown Toronto?
So the the large meeting and conference planners always take a look at the availability of hotel rooms when they're to make sure that there's enough space for their attendees to get housed. And therefore, we know of some very large conventions that cannot come to Toronto because there are not enough hotel rooms in it.
And so, but at the same time, we see the tourist numbers hit record levels over the past year. Where are these individuals staying?
Airbnb, friends and family.
And is it possible to compete internationally for large meetings, large conventions, by telling the convention organizers that we have Airbnb units in downtown Toronto that they can rent?
It's the only sales pitch we have, so we probably would use that.
And are we most likely to be successful to attract a convention that may have 100,000 attendees to it?
That's your last question.
Certainly not for those convention organizers that like their attendees to be together, which is the case for many of the more technical areas of topics.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Fragadakis, questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on Councillor Wong-Tam's line of questioning to the General Manager of Economic Development and Culture. So, so we have a convention center downtown, and we try to attract large conventions to it. How many people does that facility hold? If you had a large convention.
The downtown convention center, when you add up both the south and north, is around 500 and something thousand square feet.
Okay, so for example, Microsoft, when they do their large conventions and they book out, I don't know what, 5 to 10 years in advance, something like that, could that be hosted in the convention center with the accompanying rooms that would be required in hotels in our city?
So we had Microsoft booked, and they pulled out of that booking because of a worry of, one of the reasons was a significant worry about the amount of hotel space.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Councillor Wong-Tam to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I'd like to ask the clerks to put a motion on the screen. And I believe it's coming, but essentially the motion is asking...
No, do you have your motion ready?
Thank you very much. It's a fairly straightforward motion, Madam Speaker. I'm simply asking the staff to report back on the recommendation by April 2018 at the next meeting, at the meeting of Economic Development and Culture. I think that you know, staff are prepared to do this work, which is to find, to explore the creation of a hotel accommodation replacement policy. And I can't stress, Madam Speaker, how important it is that we close this particular loophole. We are losing at an alarming rate a number of viable mid-range hotels in downtown Toronto. And at the same time, what we're seeing is this incredible surge of interest to come visit this city. Whether it's individuals or families, or large convention organizers and meeting organizers. And we're actually about to take away those opportunities to host those large meetings because we are losing a great number of hotel facilities. We cannot put a convention in an Airbnb. I mean, Airbnbs, taking out affordable housing and decent housing for residents in the City of Toronto is certainly a problem, but Airbnb is acting as our de facto hotel, as a de facto hotel system, is creating a different problem. So a lot of problems being pointed at Airbnb, but the challenge we have before us is that I have seen planning staff struggle in their negotiation, as I have, with the applicants as they come in wanting to demolish their hotels and put into place condominiums. And the Chelsea Hotel is a fantastic example. 1,600 rooms at the Chelsea Hotel. The application that's before us is not even going to replace close to half. And that's the largest hotel that we have in the city. And so when we're talking about the magnitude of numbers of visitors coming in through a Microsoft convention of 100,000, there's just no way. Of course we were not going to be a competitor. Of course they were going to back out from the City of Toronto. We can't host them. And then at the same time, we want to talk about building a second convention center. I would say don't bother. Unless it's going to have a large, very, very significant volume of hotel capacity there, I would say simply don't bother. We're at a, I would say, Madam Speaker, we have a bit of a crisis. Here I go again. I hate to use this word, but we have an emergency before us, Madam Speaker. And the emergency is that we're losing high-quality, mid-range hotels at an alarming rate. And if we don't build this policy, and we have to get it back onto the floor very quickly because we need to have some type of lever to negotiate with these developers as they come in with their applications. If we don't do this in quick order, we are not just going to lose the Chelsea, we're going to lose the Courtyard Marriott. We're going to see a lot of other hotels go under the wrecking ball, and you will not see them back. So yes, we have an affordable housing crisis. Guess how it happened. And yes, we are doing very, very well internationally from the perspective of attracting international tourists. Toronto is on fire. People are talking about us, but we're not going to be able to compete for anything. Not for, quite honestly, for FIFA or the Olympics or anything else if we actually don't have a healthy supply of hotels. Hotels also generate good quality jobs, unionized jobs. And we are now watching people who've given a good amount of their lifetime providing excellent service, representing our city, being the cultural ambassadors of Toronto, they're losing their jobs. And those jobs, as we know, are going to be very difficult to replace. I predict that they will not be able to go into another career at that advanced age in their 40s and 50s and land in another good-paying unionized job. This is a problem. We have to get in front of it. I think that we cannot wait and leave it open-ended to have the staff report back when they report back. We have to give them clear direction, report back in April. We're going to tackle it then. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Thompson to speak.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Just briefly to say, and I don't disagree with Councillor Wong-Tam on the issues around the the challenges that we're experiencing in the city with respect to some of the closures of hotels and then the properties being transformed into condos, because that's generally what they are being transformed into. And the argument that's being made with respect to not having enough space in the city, I think that there's a corresponding component of that argument that we have to realize as well. Many of the conventions that we actually want to attract in this city, we actually can't. And the reason why we actually can't is that we don't have the convention space to be able to facilitate bringing those conventions here. So even with respect to the Microsoft, it wasn't just the issue around the hotel availabilities or rooms that we actually didn't have in the city. We don't have enough amenities. Just last week, Speaker, I had to call the owner of the Royal York Hotel in order just to speak to her about an issue we were having with a convention to come into the city. They wanted to bring the convention in October. They couldn't get those dates. They wanted to bring them in November. They couldn't get those dates. They said perhaps December, because we have a narrow window there with respect to capacity and so on. I spoke to her in the U.S. Last week. We said, can you really help us to talk to your own people? And the reason that is that sometimes even some of the demands that the hotels actually place on some of the conventions that are coming to the city is rather onerous and problematic. So the point that I'm simply making to you is that it's not just the issue with respect to the shortage of the rooms, because even with respect to our planning, and even some of us as councillors, we're not amenable to adding additional space or capacity to buildings that are being built so we can actually have more hotels or hotel rooms. So there is a challenge with respect to this issue. The whole dichotomy in terms of whether or not we have enough or don't have enough and so on, it's a greater conversation that has to take place. I don't think it's just the issue around, the hotels. Well, I was in Hong Kong recently, and I met with the owners of the Delta Chelsea, and they have plans to build a particular hotel. They have gone to London, England to build a hotel. They've gone to San Francisco. The discussion I had with them about spending monies here in Toronto, obviously they're going to proceed with respect to spending some money here, but when the mayor sent an email to them about the, the concerns that they had regarding, the planning issues around putting a hotel in the city, the amount of time it takes, all of these things create problems. So if builders or developers can actually advance the building opportunities for their hotels, they'll do it quicker. It seems to take an inordinate amount of time here. So I just wanted to raise those issues, Speaker, to let you know that it isn't just the fact of capacity. It is even just the ability to go through the planning process that really creates a level of frustration, so to create that environment where people actually don't want to invest. And so those are some of the challenges that we have to look at, and we have to deal with those.
Okay, thank you. So we have one motion. Okay, it's on the screen. On favor? Carried. Item is amended. On favor? Carried. On page 3, GM 23.8, Councillor Holland, you held the item down. Is Councillor Holland here? Yeah. So why don't we go to the bottom of the page? We'll skip those items. We'll go to the bottom of the page to NY 26.2, which is Councillor Audrey that you held down. Yeah, I know you held it down as a courtesy. So it's here without recommendation, 1 Heathcote Avenue. Who's
I'm sorry, Speaker. I was asked to hold it as a courtesy.
No, I understand.
I don't even know whose ward it's in. Is it Jay Robinson's? Yeah, it's Councillor Robinson's. Do we want to hold it down until we hear from her?
Let's
Thank you.
continue then.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to page 4 then. Page 4, which is MM 36.158 Yonge Street. Councillor Filion, you held the item down. Do we have questions to staff?
Madam Speaker, if I could hold this down a little bit longer, there's an issue of whether the property has been sold and whether or not there would be a more appropriate motion to make.
All right, we'll continue to hold that one down. Page 4, Executive Committee, X30.1, Waterfront Transit Network Plan. Councillor Grimes. Questions to staff?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I was going to release that, but I heard Councillor Holiday may have some questions on that, so I'll release that to Councillor Holiday.
Councillor Holiday, questions?
Yes, do we have planning, sorry, Madam Speaker, do we have planning staff in the room that can answer?
Yeah.
Great. Can someone talk to me a little bit about any analysis that was done on the segment of proposed transit right-of-way along the lakeshore from, I think it's called the Humber Bay section? Has anyone done any impact analysis to the traffic and the motoring environment? Does this involve any changes to turns, Michigan U-turns, that kind of thing? The things that we've been talking about with the modifications to the Eglinton LRT project. I don't see any motoring environment analysis in the report. Can someone offer comment on
that? Through the chair, there is continuing work being led by the city as part of the Park Lawn Transportation Plan in that area, and that is looking at issues like that. In addition, it's expected that there's enough space to allow for the same number of through road lanes along the lakeshore as there are now.
Okay, so the same number of lanes would be preserved. What about any turning movements into, say, Palais Royale or one of the underpasses that go underneath the Gardiner Expressway? Palace Pier development, I think, suggested by one of my colleagues here. Are there any interruptions to those left turns? As I know that putting a transit corridor through a major arterial can disrupt those type of movements. There's a central bone of contention with the Eglinton proposal.
Through the chair, this is a somewhat different area than the Eglinton proposal. There are fewer accesses off of Lakeshore Avenue, and the proposal doesn't extend as far east as Palace Pier Court. Okay. The reserved right-of-way would only need to extend as far as the entrance to Humber Loop.
Okay, but that doesn't answer whether or not there are any interruptions to the left turns. I appreciate there's less, but is there a plan? Is there any analysis on any of that?
Through the chair, that is the work that is being done through the Park Lawn Lakeshore Transportation Project, and the analysis is being done as part of that project.
So can I be assured that we'll have some sort of a traffic impact in the next phase or the next return back to council in a report, so we get a pretty good understanding of what the implication is of this piece of infrastructure?
Yes, that report, that study will produce that information for you.
Excellent. So I had a different line of questions, and I think I wanted to talk about the extension along Bay Street. Can someone confirm to me that the cost was between the order of $400 to $600 million for that small segment down there? I know one of the options that we were looking at was to convert the existing streetcar tracks underground into a pedestrian tunnel. So why did we cast aside that particular option?
The option for the pedestrian-only connection was put aside, mainly because it allowed a moving sidewalk only in one direction, and the limited width was the big factor in that case.
I'm sorry, can you explain the limited width? So 2 streetcars go through there now. What do we mean by that?
Correct. In order to maintain a walking-only section in that tunnel, there was sufficient width for a moving sidewalk in one direction only, and the fixed pathway itself.
Okay, what's the distance? What's the walking distance?
It's about 550 meters.
500 meters. How long is the subway platform?
550 feet.
Anyone know?
550
150 meters?
About 150 meters, correct.
Thank you very much. And so any sense on what the cost is to make a pedestrian-only access underground in comparison to the $400 to $600 million?
Sorry, through the chair, can I have that question repeated, please?
Of course. Any sense on what the cost is to convert those tunnels to a pedestrian-only access in contrast to the $400 to $600 million proposal for the other options, or for something more active?
The rough cost estimate we had was roughly about $100 million less than the other options.
That includes a moving sidewalk?
That's correct.
Okay, and last question, I think they call it a funicular technology. Am I right? Is that a cable car?
Through the chair, the funicular cable car system is a cable-propelled transit system. That's correct.
Fantastic. And that was one of the possible options out of the three, and that was in the hundreds of millions of dollars range.
That's correct.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for taking those questions.
Thank you, Councillor Holiday. Councillor Layton.
Can we stay on some of those cost estimates for a second? That the Union Link. What is the range in cost?
Through the chair, the range in the cost is roughly $400 to $600 million for those two options.
And the extension loop onto Dufferin? Do we have a preliminary cost? We're early design stages, I appreciate.
Very early stages is $50 to $100 million for that extension over to Dufferin.
And the Humber, the extension west of Dufferin down to Humber Bay Shore, is there a range for that, the westernmost extension?
The range for that is we're approximately $400 to $500 million on that project.
Ridership. Do we have a predicted ridership along the corridor?
Through the chair, in which section?
Let's take the section from Exhibition Place to Union.
The approach to Union Station, starting with that one, we're looking at a peak hour flow of passengers of approximately 3,700 in the peak hour, peak direction. The design in that section is aimed at something more robust, approximately 7,000. As we move away from Union Station, obviously the passenger numbers decline. We're looking at approximately 500 to 1,000 in the Exhibition Place area.
Okay. How much space, and maybe this is for the CFO, okay, maybe give him a second. How much space is there in our capital budget? How close are we to our limit?
So with the recent additions to the capital budget in respect of the shelter infrastructure, we're essentially hitting against the 15% average debt guideline.
So where could we find, what other projects are in the realm of, it's roughly $1 billion, 1.1 to 1.4 billion for this level of transit infrastructure. What's the range? Like what types of projects have that dollar value that would need to be pushed later on or changed significantly to address this pressure?
So the three largest projects that come to mind would be the Gardner Rehab, Scarborough Subway, and probably George Street. George Street is in the neighborhood of $500 million.
So George Street wouldn't be enough, but changing direction on the Gardner or Scarborough or the Scarborough subway extension would be in the same value realm that could accommodate an additional transit project of this scale.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, can someone remind me, thank you very much, can someone remind me of the timeline? Because the EA for portions of this were started before I was a city councillor in 2008, correct?
That's correct. For the section over to Dufferin Street, that original EA was completed in roughly 2008.
So when did we start work on this?
On the EA, or?
Yeah, on the EA, let's say. When was it conceived that there would be an LRT in this corridor?
The original plan actually goes back to 1993. I believe it was finally approved in 1995. It was the Waterfront West LRT plan.
So 1993-95, it was approved. The EA goes in 2008, is completed in 2008. What happened in 2010, when work seems to have stopped in this particular file?
There's a long history on the transit file, but there are a number of things happening in terms of Transit City and evolution of the plan. The further work that was done by Metrolinx as part of their regional plan.
Last question.
So, but if I could be, the funding was lost by from the provincial government, and the mayor of the time said pencils down. Is that a roughly good assumption of what happened?
Yes, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Layton. Councillor Mihevc.
Yes, thank you very much. My issue is the piece between Union Station and Queens Quay. But let me start with this question. I asked the former city planner this same question. What kind of population density are we looking in the next 10, 20, 30 years being added to an already intensifying waterfront?
Through the chair, as part of this project, we looked at the population and employment forecasts throughout this study area. The key areas in terms of growth are in Humber Bay Shores, Liberty Village, and downtown on the Portlands in particular. We're looking at numbers of 20 to 40,000 in terms of population increase, significant numbers right along the waterfront.
In each section, the number that the previous city planner gave was literally in the hundreds of thousands. Just around the Toronto Star building, it would be 28,000 alone, right there. So would it be fair to say that this is going to be the most massive increase to Toronto's population that we've witnessed in quite a while?
Through the chair, the growth in population and employment is significant in the waterfront area. And it's not just the population and employment, it's the visitors that come down here to all of the cultural facilities, recreational, sporting venues.
So it's massive, and therefore, the conclusion to that piece, because land use planning and transit planning are intimately linked, is that we really have to get it right. And this is not a project where getting it wrong is frankly an option. We have to build very solid, good public transit down there.
Yes, that's absolutely correct.
Okay, so that piece between Queens Quay and Union Station has to be able to carry a heck of a lot of people, because that's the core link with the city north of the rail corridor and north of the Gardner Expressway. Is that fair too?
Yes, that's correct.
So we have done an EA, TTC did an EA, and it led to the conclusion that the best way to develop Waterfront East was to add capacity to the underground connection between Union Station and Queens Quay. So this question to the TTC, could you affirm that we've done that the TTC has done that work, had done that work, or has done that work?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
And what was the conclusion of that work as to the best technology to achieve, given the growth, given that we've got to get it right, what was the conclusion of that study?
TTC staff brought a report to the TTC board meeting in November, which discussed the issues about the Queens Quay Union Link in both technologies. And from a transit planning point of view, noted that the continuing a streetcar operation was the best thing for transit customers.
And that is still the TTC staff's position, the TTC board's position as of this moment?
That is correct.
And have you had a chance to review the conclusions of that EA study?
No, we are waiting to work with the City and Waterfront Toronto, and that work will soon start on a more detailed evaluation of those options.
I see. Is there any reason that we should be reviewing it, even? Why should we doubt the study, the work that we've already done?
We have committed to work with the City and Waterfront Toronto to look at it in a more detailed way. The focus we took on it was strictly from a transit rider's point of view. We accept that we do need to work with the other parties to look at it in a more wholesome way.
Okay, and can I ask this to the, well, I'm not sure, to the planning staff, how much of that exercise, because I know that we all know that that piece between Union Station and Queens Quay is an expensive proposition. Is this an area where, frankly, well, it's almost a redundant question, is this a place where we should be saving money or really investing given the kinds of densities that are going on the waterfront?
Through the chair, just to clarify, that is an expensive section of the plan. That also, though, includes the costs of the East Bayfront part. It's not just the Queens Quay to Union loop, and that's a very critical piece of the infrastructure of the line. One of the most important pieces.
Not a place to cheap out.
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Grimes, questions?
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Humber Bay Shores, how many people do we see finishing off there in the next couple of years that we've added in the last decade? Is that the planning?
In the Humber Bay Shores, we're looking at growth of, in terms of population, and it's quite a wide range here because of the different scenarios, of anywhere from 25 to 100% growth in population in that
Well, it's
area.
around 30,000 people, brand new community there?
20,000.
20,000? So going from Park Lawn up to the QEW, that was never in the city's plan, correct? The OMB approved all that density on the, let's call it the west side, it's not really, but that was never in the city's plan, correct?
I can't answer that question.
City planning answer that?
I can answer that. That was not part of the city's plan. Those developments came on appeal at the OMB.
Thank you, Mr. Levy. So, and on Councillor Holiday, Deputy Mayor Holiday's questioning of this study, and I don't think he really understands the type of study that's happening there. We call it the Park Lawn Master Study. This is not a study that's going to take 2-3 months and come back to Council, correct?
Through the chair, that's correct.
This has been happening for how long?
The study has been underway over the past year.
And we expect this probably go for at least a couple of years, this study, correct?
No, it should be concluded next year.
Next year, so a couple of years study. The study is going to take 2 years when it start to finish. And how much, there's been consultation on that study?
Through the chair, yes, there has been consultation, and that will continue.
And how many consultation meetings we had, just not only in my ward?
The Park Lawn Transportation Master Plan has gone through at least one. They've got another round of consultation coming up, and possibly a third as well.
And how about the waterfront reset going from the west to the east? Has there been consultation happening on that?
Through the chair, we've had at least 2 rounds in each phase of this project.
Okay, and then I guess the big unknown at Park Lawn and Lakeshore, where it's at tipping point now, and we've had no investment in transit there, that our city manager has said that in prior meetings. Across the street, we have the craft plant. How many acres are over there? On the other side of the street?
Through the chair, I apologize. I don't have the acreage on that
28 acres,
site.
if I can help you out there. 28 acres, and it's now, the plant's been demolished. That's off to the OMB, is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So if something happens there, regardless what it is, employment or mixed use, what the developer's fighting for, we're going to be in pretty bad shape if that doesn't go our way at the OMB, correct?
Correct.
Those are my questions. Thank you.
Councillor Grimes to speak.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. And this is music to my ears, this report coming forward. I want to thank our Deputy City Manager, John Livy, for helping me bring this forward. It's very important that we get this done and on the books. We have an explosion just in the West End. The big unknown is we'll have the Mr. Christie plant, the Kraft plant, whatever happens there, if it's mixed use or industrial, we're going to need transit there. So on our Deputy Mayor Holliday's question about the 2 lanes, before that used to concern me, but now we have express buses heading downtown that take 40 minutes sitting in traffic to go 1 kilometer. And if you look around them, there's 1 person in every car. And I've had the mayor out there on a number of occasions. We were out there last week for a press conference. He's hearing it loud and clear from my residents that transit has to be improved there, and I want to thank the mayor for coming out on a number of occasions, but it's at the tipping point. We have to do something. And if you look at Park Lawn and Lakeshore, I've talked to the TTC, if we curb from Park Lawn and Lakeshore going to the current Humber Loop, which is about, I'd say, 1 kilometer, and then you've got all the work in Councillor Doucette's ward that's already under, the work is being done now. There's already a dedicated runway that goes to the St. Joe's Hospital and stops. We've got 30% design going in behind Exhibition Place, going out the west to join with Dufferin. That's at 30% design. That happens. How do we join Dufferin to St. Joe's Hospital? That's the question. This is in this report. This is low-hanging fruit. It's, $1 billion or more, but this is the link we have to find. So this is what my residents want to hear, and I wanted to say this can't be any more important, and it's right across the waterfront. So this is a very important piece, and I said the Kraft plant, whatever's going to happen there, it's going to be huge. It's at a tipping point now, and we have to come forward with something. So I'm happy to this forward and ask you to support this important plan.
Thank you. Councillor Troisi.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Council has already determined that Queens Quay East LRT is a priority project. When that plan was approved in 2010, we intended to be ahead of the game and leading the revitalization of the precinct with transit. But now we are no longer at the beginning of the redevelopment. Course Entertainment, George Brown College, residential development by Tridell, Hines, Daniels have opened or are under construction. Sidewalk Toronto, with a major investment of $50 million US, is studying the next wave of development at Queens Quay. 2 weeks ago, I attended the groundbreaking of the new LCBO head office in the Lower Yonge precinct. At the event, Mayor John Tory rightly encouraged our provincial partners to come to the table with funding for this project. So I'm supporting continuing the study of transit options for East Bayfront LRT to evaluate a solution that provides excellent transit and gets this project going as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mihevc.
Yes, thank you very much. I don't want to add too much to this, but having been on the TTC for many terms, I think what Councillor, it's very interesting, Councillor Grimes is saying this is so desperate for the West End, and Councillor Troisi is saying this is so desperate for the East End. It's desperate for the city. This is a very, very important piece of infrastructure that we really have to consider, and consider very quickly. They're both, of course, right. And, the central waterfront is also absolutely critical. Just around the Toronto Star building, we are putting in residences sufficient for 28,000 people. So my fear, frankly, with this process, and the only reason why I'm speaking is because we did do good work at the TTC in identifying the connection between Union Station, which now has something like 300,000 people going through it every day, and will be going to 500,000 people within the next generation, and Queens Quay. That connection, I think, is the tough piece that we really got to get our heads around. And my hope is that this is not a fiscally driven, do it on the cheap kind of solution. Not when you're adding hundreds, literally hundreds of thousands of people to Waterfront East and Waterfront West. You're going to have to make that connection, that link right there is going to be absolutely critical to any infrastructure that then follows going eastward and westward. So my hope and my plea and my eyes will be on our planning staff and on our TTC to do the right thing there. And if it costs $500 million, it costs $500 million, and get over it, because you're doing this not for your children, but for your children's children, and they'll regret it if we don't do the right thing. It is 600 meters between Queens Quay and Union Station. Making a mistake there can cost you literally hundreds of thousands of transit rides on a weekly basis. And you don't want people going into their cars or not taking the journeys or not that they need to take, or not contributing to the economic vitality of the downtown, because that missing link is not dealt with appropriately. So I'm just really saying at this point is that my hope and plea is that staff look at that carefully and respect the work that TTC has already done. And if there is a higher thing, okay, fine, I suppose we'll all learn to accept it. That provides more mobility and more mobility between Union Station and Queens Quay, fine. I don't see it. I think many people that I've spoken to say they don't see it. And so if it isn't there, then let's do the right thing and make sure that there's a very, very good LRT connection between Queens Quay East, across Queens Quay, and Queens Quay, between Queens Quay and Union Station. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Councillor Layton.
Councillor Mihevc raised a really, really important point at the very end there, and I think that it got lost. And it's us doing what's right, not what's easy. And it would be very easy for me to respond to my constituents that say, from Liberty Village, that say, the King Street car is packed, we need a subway. You need to build a subway along King. You need to build a subway along Queen. Subways, subways, subways. You know, it'd be really, really easy for me to turn around and say, of course, and I'm going to go there to City Council and put a motion on the floor and drive that message home. But would it be right? And would it be a good direction for us to take in the city? Would it work in the mix of projects within our debt ceiling? Would it work within the available resources for specifically for the number of people that would be taking that particular piece? And the reality is, no, it won't. And no matter how hard I try to spin it, it won't. Those numbers just don't work there. What works there is the technology that's been proposed for 25 years that unfortunately, due to three things, as I count them or see them, and I might be wrong, there may be more. One is the McGuinty government cut a whole lot of money to the City of Toronto to implement Transit City. Many of the projects disappeared on that day, and I can't remember the year. It was before I was on City Council. What was it, Gord? 2009. That all of a sudden it went from a fully funded Transit City to a half-funded Transit City. We've never gotten back that money in the form of the other projects. We've gotten back some money. It's all gone into a hole. It's gone into planning and building one stop in Scarborough. But that's not what I want to focus on, because the second point is, unbeknownst to all of us, when our last mayor was elected, he said pencils down on some pretty key projects, including this one, and so work towards planning the LRT for City Place, all those buildings at City Place, all of the future development in King Spadina that's going to be a new city the size of Collingwood in the next 5 years in the downtown core, everything west of Bathurst and Fort York, those 5,000 people, the 12,000 people that live in Liberty Village, and I don't know how many thousand people that live in south of Etobicoke that have been waiting 20 years, but the moment that Mayor Ford said pencils down on that project, we lost another 5 years. So between those two things, we could have had transit to those neighborhoods now. We don't, as a result of those two decisions, those two individuals. The third piece is where we're choosing to put our current resources. And that, as we've heard, there are two projects of a similar magnitude that would allow us, if a change in direction was chosen by this council, at their current cost, I might also say, because that will probably change with time, as things do. But there are two projects that are holding us back from implementing this transit project, as well as transit projects in those just different variations of those two other projects, and that's keeping the elevated Gardiner and the one-stop Scarborough subway. So those are the three things that are really holding back this, or have held back this piece of infrastructure for not one, but for 2 decades. And it's not banking on development coming or addressing potential future needs of a community. It is real need because we approved that development, and that development has all happened. So I hope, I beg, that this council takes this seriously and moves this forward with the same vigor that they used to push forward other transit projects across the city. And I just hope that we can remember what Councillor Mihevc said. It does take courage to talk about what's right with our constituents rather than taking the easy approach of just saying exactly what they would like. We have to play a role in helping educate people about choices and decisions that we make in a community as we try to benefit the entire city. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cole to speak.
Well, first of all, Madam Speaker, I want to commend Councillor DeBaeremaeker for not adding his name to the speakers list after that speech, and not to get into that debate. I think this is great news for both the residents in Etobicoke that Councillor Grimes has been advocating for and pushing for the so obvious transit improvements that are needed out there. It's good news for what we're doing in the east, of course, but to go back to Commissioner Mihevc's speech, it's that middle link that really I think is the most integral portion of this report and debate that's in front of us. How do we get from Union Station to Queen's Quay? And we have to make sure that we choose a mode and a method that makes sense for the number of transit users that we expect and just residents we expect in that part of the corridor of the city. It will be massive. And so I think that we have to make the right choice. I think the TTC has done a lot of good work and due diligence on what that appropriate choice is. And I hope it won't get lost in the greater debate over the entirety of this, of the waterfront and transit debates in general. But I think that's important, and I know that the city and Waterfront Toronto and the TTC are doing very good work together. They're doing more analysis and more analysis and more analysis because there is a bit of a logjam. But at the end of the day, I think we know what the right choice is. The TTC's laid that out. It's been on the books for quite some time. They've done that further analysis, and the sooner we move forward with that piece, that link, that missing link, then all these other pieces will follow suit. And so with that, I commend everyone for bringing this report forward, linking all of these transit initiatives together along the waterfront, but let's address that one issue, and I think we know what the right way to go forward on that is. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Holyday to speak.
Thank you, Speaker. I've got a couple of motions, if I can have the first one placed. Thank you. This motion just simply asks to keep the comparative analysis of a pedestrian tunnel option included in the next version of the report. I'll speak to that in a minute. And there's a second motion in there. The second motion is to include some motor vehicle travel time analysis on the impact to Lakeshore. I didn't see any of it in this report. That's important to me. It's important to my constituents to understand what these changes to Lakeshore mean. Perhaps they are nothing. Perhaps they are something. This motion just asked that that be included in the work going forward. And I hope I'm wrong and that it's a redundant ask that it's coming anyways. Back to my first motion. Reading the report, I realized that a big chunk of the cost is this quote-unquote missing link. You know, it's funny, I actually went right through that space on Monday night. It was on the 6 Bay bus, and a couple of weeks earlier, I walked that very stretch. And I think most of the time I spent was at the light at Lakeshore Boulevard, more than that walk. It's a 4-minute walk. You know, the subway was really busy this morning, so just for fun, I got off at Spadina and I transferred to the southbound train, and I counted my steps. Everyone talks about the big link in Spadina Station. Well, if I counted my steps right, I figure that stretch is about half of what this stretch is. And to equate that to anyone that rides a TTC is 150 meters long for a train platform. We're talking about a distance the length of 3 train platforms. That gets you to 450 meters. According to the map that I looked at, if you come out of the south door of Union Station, it's about 350 meters to that intersection. So I don't know where we've lost our sense of perspective or scale, but we're talking about something that is in the order of $1 to $2 million a meter. I understand the notion of bringing some tracks in, but there's also another option in here to put a cable-actuated car. I'm not really sure that that's good value for money. If I was waiting for that car, I'd much rather walk the 4 minutes to get from one stop to the other. It'd be much faster. Everyone knows that spends time on a transit system that changing from a subway to a different mode to another car is where you waste all your time waiting for things to change over. I'm not saying that I have the total answer here, but I don't think we should drop the option of a pedestrian walkway, especially if it means that this project could fall behind the water line. When we're talking about $400 to $600 million, and if that escalates over time, you got $1 billion for this little tiny link on a massive network that we're talking about in this report, several kilometers long. So, you know, people will feel strongly about this. I don't think we'd be doing our due diligence unless we always considered that one singular option. I think you should do some reality testing yourselves, members of council. Do what I did, count some spaces, some paces. Figure out how long it takes for you to walk that distance. Where are the precedents in this city? Can you imagine the people that get off at Union Station off the subway and walk through the pass system to their place of work? I bet you it's a whole heck of a lot more than 500 meters. I bet Councillor Carey-Janis likes Tim Hortons coffee. Well, I figured out that it was about 500 meters from his office door to the Tim Hortons across the square. That's one way. To put that in perspective, it's something that many of us move in every day, multiple times a day. And let's face it, we should be doing a lot more walking around here. Anyways, I hope you give the motion some consideration. Happy to take questions, Councillor Perks.
Councillor Perks, clarification of the motion.
So could I just ask if you'd be willing to accept a friendly amendment so that we're asking staff to report on how long it takes people to get where they're going, not vehicles?
I think I'd have to understand what you mean by that, like people.
Well, the purpose of a transportation network, whether it's transit or automobiles or bicycles or sidewalks or any of these things, is for people to get to point A to point B.
Yes.
Not the conveyance itself. So the meaningful information is how long it takes people to get from point A to point B. So I was wondering if you would amend your motion to remove the vehicles and put in people, because that's after all the job we do.
I made a specific note. The report actually speaks to some of the different modes on the lakeshore, including delay to transit with the different configuration options, but it didn't look at motor vehicles. So I think the motor vehicle component should be included. If the report also talks about other modes of transport, I'm happy to look at those as well. I think that's useful information. And in fact, the configuration, much like the discussion on Eglinton Avenue, should tell us delay in terms of configuration for people. So if one alignment is quicker than the other, I think that goes into the mix of decision making. But I'm very, very concerned that we're not understanding what happens to the flow on Lakeshore. And if you live out in Etobicoke where I am, you know that Lakeshore and the Garden are pretty much all that's left at the south end of the city to get into downtown. So if there's a closure on the Gardner Expressway, we're down to the Lakeshore. I'd like to know if I'm adding a delay of several minutes or taking away turn options for residents of the West End.
Okay.
Councillor, I appreciate all of that, but I didn't hear an answer. Would you amend it so it said people?
Oh, to be very clear, no.
Okay.
No.
Councillor DiCiano to speak.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think most people here are united in the importance of approving this item, Waterfront Transit Network Plan. I want to begin by thanking Councillor Grimes for resetting this plan and bringing it back to this council. And I just wanted to give a little bit of an idea of what's going on in Ward 5. Etobicoke Lakeshore is one of the largest constituency in the country, without a doubt. And it's growing like gangbusters. And we've talked about Park Lawn and Lakeshore a lot. A great deal of discussion happens with respect to Park Lawn and Lakeshore. But what people need to further understand is what's happening on the Queensway, 1 Street North. It is growing like gangbusters. This is an avenue that's somewhat of a highway, and we have so many planning applications in the hop right now. Imagine mid-rise applications coming in with 200+ units. That's the size of mid. We're not talking about these small little buildings coming in. So on top of what's going on in Councillor Grimes' ward, we just can't move in Etobicoke Lakeshore anymore. The Queensway is frozen. The Lakeshore is frozen. The food terminal, right at Park Lawn and the Queensway, the food terminal is currently, if you drive down the QEW right now, a massive expansion of the food terminal. So you've got business interests, you've got residential interests. Nothing is more important than making sure we can connect the West End to the downtown core. And that's without talking about what's happening on the Christie lands. I mean, imagine what's the future of the Christie lands, whether it be employment or whether it be residential. How can any of us approve something on the Kristyn lands when there's no hope for transit in the area. We need transit. I'm hoping everyone here, I'm hoping it'll be a unanimous vote that the Waterfront Transit Network Plan is approved here, and we get on with making sure that we connect residents and businesses to the rest of the city in a way that's convenient for everybody. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we have one motion. I'll put it on the screen. Two motions by Councillor Holyday. Recorded vote.
Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor Wong-Tam, Councillor McMahon, please.
The vote is 18 for each side. The amendment loses on a tie.
Okay, then the second amendment. No, it's the Second Amendment.
Councillor Kelly, please. Councillor Perruzza. Councillor Carmichael-Greb, please. Councillor Shan.
The amendment carries 21 to 15.
Item as amended. All in favor? Recorded vote.
Councillor Davis, please. Councillor Perruzza.
Councillor Burnside, please.
The item as amended carries 35 to 2.
Okay. We're going to go back to page GM 23.8. Councillor Holland, you held the item down. Do you have questions?
No. I don't have questions of staff. I've just prepared a motion, which I can move.
Does the staff have your motion?
The staff should have the motion.
Do we have Councillor Holland's motion?
I know, sorry about that, but that is it. Yeah, thanks, John, thanks. Sorry. Okay, great. John, thank you.
Okay.
So I'm just going to move a quick motion. So this item was reviewed by staff. I know that I've worked really closely with staff on this particular review of our procurement policies in regard to my initial recommendation, which was to do business with corporations that would meet gender parity on their boards, but that was not staff's recommendation to move forward with that. But so I did work closely with staff on this recommendation that will, I think, also serve in the interests of moving gender parity on boards. So this is City Council direct the City Manager to work with and support the Province of Ontario's Women in Business Steering Committee in order to increase the gender diversity on corporate boards to reflect gender parity. And then the second one is that City Council direct the City Purchasing Officer to include in all procurements a statement that indicates City Council support that all corporations should strive to have gender parity on their corporate boards, and that City staff establish as part of the City's procurement process a mechanism to collect from entities conducting business with the City information on gender diversity on their boards. So simply put, this would not demand that corporations have gender parity on their boards, but I think what it would do is work with corporations to have disclosure. I mean, obviously there are no entities out there that would validate or be able to verify that, but there is a strong movement and current within the corporate sector to move towards gender parity. As we know, we're at 44% gender parity on the city's boards. In the private sector, we're only at 13%, which is a glacial speed of 1% a year, which would mean it would take about 30 years to meet gender diversity. So I'm hoping that I get your support on this. I think it's the right direction, and it hopefully will meet some sort of, or at least move the dial, I would say, on advancing gender parity on boards. And I think I have questions.
Councillor Davis.
Since we didn't get a chance to ask staff, I'll ask you. On the first motion, which says to work with the province and support this effort, what kind of commitment will that be? How much staff time? Are we talking about investing funds? I have no idea what that initiative is.
Right. So it's basically our. So with Mike Patchlock and his team are very aware that the province has conducted and set up a steering committee. Charles Sousa chairs that, and there's a number of MPPs that sit on that steering committee, and they're working towards gender parity and working with the private sector.
So there are elected politicians on that committee?
That's right.
So why wouldn't we have elected politicians there too? It's kind of a weird mix. You don't usually do that.
Well, we wouldn't have the city sitting on their steering committee.
So you're asking our staff to sit on the steering committee?
No, I'm asking them to work with and to continue dialogue with the province in this regard. So when this item was coming through and they were doing and conducting public consultations and getting feedback on my original motion, what they came up with was the reality that the province holds the power in this regard in order to mandate such legislation. So since we don't have that, what we should be doing is at least working with the province towards that measure.
Okay, well, I don't have any understanding of what impact that may have on our staff or what their views are on it. Why would we not just gather information on what the province is doing and do what you're suggesting in recommendation 2 and develop our own policy?
Right, and so, Councillor Davis, if you want to move a friendly amendment on that and get feedback from staff on exactly what they would do and report back to council, then that's your prerogative to do that as well.
Okay, well, I've just seen it, so we didn't get any chance to really ask questions about it either. Okay, I'll see if there's something else I can amend, but right now we're already at speakers.
Okay, well, this is why, like, I did say, does anybody have any questions? Nobody put their name up. I'm sorry, but Councillor Ainsley, questions?
Sorry, we're doing questions of staff now?
No, to Councillor Holland.
Okay. Sorry, Councillor Holland, I need some clarification on this. Thank you. Can I get some clarification on the first part of your motion? So I understand that when this was brought before government management, and the recommendation of the treasurer, when it talked about gender parity, was to receive it for information. Yeah. And now you've revised your motion, and you're looking at increasing gender diversity on our corporate boards. And I'm trying to understand why you're stopping in gender diversity and not also looking at racial diversity.
Right. So that's a great question, and it was discussed at the public meeting that was held with staff, and looking at a broader scope. We look at racial diversity within gender diversity, and so, for example, on the corporation's nominating panel, which I chair, we account that within the gender diversity component, and obviously in the broader spectrum of that as well. This one is exactly what it says. It is for gender diversity. If there is a movement to have broader diversity and inclusion, which we do, but that would be a motion that you would move separately to that. Again, that was discussed at the public consultation, but at this point in time, it does reflect gender diversity.
Okay.
But not specifically, it's like a broader scope within that as well.
Okay, but we're still not addressing racial diversity, right? It just, originally this was about gender parity, and then it's changed to gender diversity. So you're keeping it at a very narrow scope when you're talking about diversifying our boards, correct?
Well, this one is particular to gender diversity, and the original motion was that as well.
Okay. And then, so my next question, Madam Speaker, on the second motion, the last part where it says city staff establish a mechanism to collect from entities conducting business with the city information on gender diversity of their boards. The treasurer in the original report said that couldn't be done.
No, actually.
And you're asking for it again.
No, actually, that's not true. And Mike Pashlak, actually, we worked together on the crafting of this motion. So when the original report was not going to move forward, we came up with some measures that would be able to move forward without the report.
Okay. Sorry. Go ahead.
Okay, but that's the information in the original report. That was before my government management committee.
No.
They didn't have a mechanism to collect this information.
But they're creating one to gather information, but what it says exactly here is that it's not a requirement.
Okay,
That's the differential.
That's your time. The title of the item is gender diversity. That's the title that was a government management. Councillor McMahon.
Thank you very much.
Clarification of the motion.
Sure. Thank you very much. I actually think this is a great motion. I'm wondering what you think our protégés would think of this.
Yeah, I think it would be great if they were included in it in some manner. I know that, again, with Mike Pashlak's shop, they do a lot of engagement with all kinds of groups, from diversity to women's groups to 30%. I mean, there's an array, probably about 50 organizations that they work with in order to look at our social procurement policies, but also to engage them. And that's what they did when they were doing the public consultation for this particular motion.
So there's possibility for our protégés to be involved.
I can't speak for him or what type of, like if something was under NDA or if there would be, there's like the blackout periods, and I'm not sure how much they could show or disclose, but I'm sure that they could engage with them to a certain degree, I'm sure.
Okay.
So maybe my protege could speak to your protege, or we could all get together? Okay,
Absolutely.
great, thank you.
Okay, clarification of the motion, Councillor Pasternak.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Speaker. As you said, the title of this item is Feasibility of Requiring Gender Diversity of Corporation Boards in City Procurements. And if you go through the report, it then starts talking about seeking to improve gender equity by increasing opportunities for women-owned businesses. Now, board members may not necessarily be shareholders or business owners. What are we trying to achieve here? Are we trying to achieve gender equity as board members, whether they're owners or not? Or do we want a majority of female or female owners as board members?
So through the social procurement policy, we've actually been going through a lot of review with procurement as it pertains to our social procurement policies, and also reviewing it in terms of making it more open and inclusive when it comes to, let's say, new technologies. So we know that historically how we've been working at the city has not been open to a lot of parties out there and a lot of enterprises that would basically put their hands up at the city and not even apply. So through I would say two different lenses, we've been looking at it through social procurement and making sure that we engage with women-led and women-owned businesses, so female founders. And then also we've been looking at it through a technology lens with new technologies that historically would not have applied or would have put their hands up to the city, to make sure that we're including them in their application process. So this part of it, just wait, I'll answer you. So this part of it, my original motion was to say that we would do business with businesses that had 50% women on their boards. So let's say 50% gender parity. But the issue became that we couldn't find a mechanism to do that. So this motion, what it's saying is that we would have the ability to have those corporations report out on their gender parity on their boards. So it's another way that they're reporting out, but it would not preclude them from applying.
You're running the clock.
Okay,
so
we're getting a little
would we do business with a woman-owned business that had a majority of men on their board?
Sorry, can you ask that question again?
Would we do business with it just says a woman-owned business with a majority of men on their board?
Yeah, so
that was your last question.
Okay, so I understand the question that you're asking, but the result of the original motion was a receipt for information. So then, because that was a receipt for information, it wasn't really going to go anywhere. We all know where that goes, into the ether. So what we did was we designed and crafted the new amendment that would acknowledge and work with corporations to report out, to simply just report on the makeup of their board, whether they were wholly owned by women, wholly owned by men, or wholly owned by whoever, however they describe themselves. So, but it would not preclude them from applying, and it would have no marker or weight against them. Okay. All it's asking for is for them to report out on the gender
Thank you. This is like clarification of a motion. We're getting into long debates. Like, please, just let's make it quick. Like, just ask the question and answer the question. Councillor Holiday, clarification of the motion.
Speaker, through you to the member of council, would you agree that someone's gender is personal information?
It is personal information unless they disclose it through when they're applying through the process.
Got my next question. So we, as a city, we have to disclose our purpose of collecting personal information and all that boilerplate stuff. What will we tell the people that are supplying that information, what our purpose is for it?
What would we tell them?
Right. Why are we collecting the personal information?
We're collecting the information like we would ask them for through the social procurement policy. What's the makeup of their corporation? It's the same premise.
Okay, but the purpose of that is to what? Is to report out to the world? Is to analyze? I mean, if you're asking for something, you have to tell the person why you're collecting. To what end are you collecting that information? I want to understand what we would tell them. You know, what is the end purpose of taking this information? I need to understand that.
Okay, so
it's a liability if we've got it, right? Like if we don't have a purpose for it.
I haven't heard that it's a liability because I worked with staff on creating the motion.
Okay.
So I think that they would tell me if that was a liability, and why would they even come up with that if it was a liability to begin with?
So, okay. So we don't have a purpose for, okay, Speaker, if I can ask the last question here.
Well,
what if somebody declines to give the information?
Sorry.
Okay.
I didn't say that there was not a purpose for the information.
You said there was not a purpose.
You said that there was a liability. I never said there was a liability on collecting any information. I think the purpose is the obvious intent, and that's to get to gender parity. That's the intent.
Okay,
I mean, I have to ask it.
I know, but this is just clarification of the motion. We're getting into long debates here.
But what if somebody declines to give the information because it's personal? Do we disqualify them? Like, I got to know what we're doing with this.
Well, then maybe like defer it or something. Like, you know.
I mean,
we're just on questions.
Okay. I mean, I treat this with great seriousness, Madam Speaker.
Yeah.
I'm very worried about this.
Okay. Yeah, like this is getting
so, Madam
into
Speaker,
a long debate.
Maybe I can help, and if I succeed in clarifying this, it's just possible even that though we're not even in questions of staff, Mr. Patchlock might start nodding. Is it possible that what you are doing here, you say you worked with staff, so what we know from reading the report is that you brought a more robust motion. You had hoped to require gender parity, and in the report at government management, what you heard is that right now you can't do that, you couldn't do that for a number of reasons, not the least of which is resources, and that in fact what Mr. Patchlock recommended in his report was that you allow him to try to achieve that through his social procurement policy. And you said that what you wanted is that at least a statement be made, a neutral statement, it's not a requirement, but that within his social procurement discussions might achieve what you were trying to achieve while not mandatory. Is that what this motion is trying to do?
That's right. So
right. So that's what we're doing. This is a fallback since your initial motion actually went a bit too far in terms of resources and what they can require. This is a fallback, but it still makes clear gender diversity is what we're looking for in all of our proponents to our tenders.
Exactly. So
Okay.
it's
right
not
there. I think I'm clear now,
thank
Madam
you.
Speaker.
Let's just, because we're running out of time. Councillor Campbell, just clarification of the motion.
Yes, thank you, Madam Speaker. I need clarification what this means. How will a statement that indicates City Council support that all corporations strive to have gender parity on their corporate boards, how is that statement, how is that intended to affect the procurement process?
right. So so generally in the procurement policy, they would have a weighting system, or they would have a marking system. So they would give a certain weight of points towards whatever they would meet in terms of the requirement. So that's actually not before us. So we're not going down that road of that being an actual requirement that they would have to have gender parity on their boards. It's simply stating that that's something, a guideline that the city would always wish, just like the social procurement policy is saying that they would like to see that within the corporation itself.
So my question to you for clarification is this either is a part of the procurement process or it is not. And so does this directing the chief purchasing officer to include procurements, in all procurements, a statement that indicates City Council support for corporations strive for gender parity, is that either part of the process or is it not part of the process?
So it's part of the process, but it doesn't weight against them whatsoever.
How is that possible?
Because there's no weight attributed to it.
if there's no weight attributed to it, why make the statement? Why make a statement? I'm more confused.
Why do we say anything, Councillor Campbell?
No, I'm more. I'm asking. Sorry, Madam Speaker. I'm asking for.
I understand the question.
I'm asking for clarification of the motion.
I'm answering the question.
So my question is, why make a statement that will have an impact on the procurement process or is intended to influence the procurement process if it's not going to influence the procurement process?
I think the intent is to message to anyone doing business with the city that that is something that the city would, let's say, have a benchmark on, or that we would wish to achieve at some point in the future, but it would not be something that would have a weight against them.
So is this, okay, all right, I mean, I get that. I get that. But is a statement in the procurement process the best way to go about doing that?
Because I mean, that's for you to question.
Okay.
Councillor Karygiannis, clarification of the motion.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Through you to Councillor, it reads here that you would want the businesses to disclose female-male ratio on their boards.
Oh, okay, just a sec. Can I ask, hold on, can I ask whoever's doing the interview, please? If you're interrupting. Well, the light is too bright and I can hear you. Okay, go ahead.
Is that right?
That's correct.
So if a company has more females, then we should look at it a little bit more favorably. Is this your intent?
No, it will not have any impact on the procurement process.
Okay, but if it has more females on the board, I think that we would look at it just slightly better. I mean, this is where we're driving at.
No, so it would have no impact on the procurement process.
So if it has no impact, then why do we need it?
I think that in this day and age, with the corporate sector being at 13% gender parity on their boards, that the responsibility falls on politicians, I would say, at every level. And since the province is failing to actually legislate this, that we should be doing something on behalf of the city.
My question is, if it has no impact, why are we doing it?
Because it's part of the process, so that we're disclosing to corporations that that is our wish.
Okay, so our wish is that they have more women on the board, correct?
I know. Exactly.
Correct, Councillor?
Sorry?
Our wish is, and I hope you pay attention, that we'd like to signal to corporations that they have more females on the board. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. So what happens if there's only females on the board? What do we tell the corporations then? Get some more males on the board?
You know, if you wish to move a motion that would have something to that effect, that is your prerogative to do that. I'm simply stating that our intent and that we're trying to signal to those corporations.
Okay, I think it's very clear, like really, it's very, very clear on clarification. Councillor Wong-Tam, you need clarification?
Yes, based on, I didn't at first, based on all the questions, I now have questions. I'm sorry, Councillor, to keep you on your feet. But I'll try to be move as quickly as possible. Your motion is not directing any company to do anything. It's simply asking them to strive to achieve gender parity on their boards. Is that correct?
Exactly.
So there is no direction here that you have to have certain quotas. This is not a quota motion, correct?
Exactly.
And with respect to the concerns that colleagues may have that perhaps if we talk about gender, we're not necessarily talking about race or perhaps age or ability. If we put an intersectional lens over the word, gender diversity, that will allow us to take a look at the wide range of gender and all the sub-hyper diversities within gender. That would be helpful, would it not?
Well, you know what? That's a really great question, and that was asked at the public meeting that we held, because I am of that view as well. The issue is if you want to separate and do a separate amendment to that, this initiative was really about gender, but it does include It absolutely includes all aspects of diversity within it.
And thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Okay.
But considering the confusion on the floor and perhaps the concerns, if we took a look at gender with a wide intersectional lens, you know, we're really capturing just everybody. Would you not agree?
I agree, and I have concerns actually that motion may not pass.
Okay. But if it doesn't, and you know, it just means the council's not interested in the intersectional analysis approach to gender, which is.
And that's why I thought if you do a separate friendly amendment, then it will. People will be open to vote as they see fit. But I would support that.
I'm happy.
Okay, this is clarification of the motion. I think that there's been enough questions asked to clarify.
I was only asking questions to clarify the motion.
Okay.
Okay, so thank you very much. That's
Thank
helpful.
you. Recess to 6:30.